A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I never thought my birthday would cause such a stir at work, but here we are. It all started when I was chatting with one of my clients, Louise, during a routine meeting about her project. She's a lovely woman, full of energy, and somehow, amid our usual discussions about budgets and timelines, my birthday came up. I casually mentioned that it was just a week away. I thought nothing of it until I overheard Louise bringing it up to my coworkers later on. That's when I got this sinking feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to share a piece of personal information with a client, it was another to hear her reprimanding my team for not remembering my birthday. "How could you forget? It's the least you could do," she'd exclaimed, her tone laced with disbelief. I could feel my cheeks burning as I listened from the other side of the office, trying to fade into the wall as I felt the weight of each word. I mean, I like my birthday, but I also know it's not a holiday that everyone should mark on their calendars. I'm not one to seek attention or make a fuss over it, but the embarrassment was magnified when I noticed my coworkers awkwardly shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. It began to snowball into something much bigger, and I couldn't shake the thought that I had triggered this because I had been too open. I considered messaging Louise to downplay her reaction, but then I worried it might just make her think I agreed with her. Either way, I knew I had inadvertently set my coworkers up for an uncomfortable situation, and now I was stuck wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. The office turned into this strange battlefield of awkward smiles and half-hearted birthday wishes, and despite my attempts to mask my feelings, I couldn't help but feel a bit resentful about the whole ordeal. Was I the asshole for sharing my birthday in the first place? Should I have anticipated that it might end up being a spectacle? As I left work that evening, I kept replaying the day in my head, questioning my choice to disclose something so simple yet loaded with social ramifications. I could hear snippets of conversations echoing in my mind, Louise's words haunting me, "You deserve better." Did I? Was it really a big deal for others to forget? I had planned to shrug it off, but now I felt like I'd sparked a drama that could have stayed dormant. Reflecting back now, I realize it was possibly just a lesson in setting boundaries. Maybe I do hold some responsibility for oversharing, but I couldn't shake the notion that others should also respect the space of personal milestones. Fast forward a few days, my coworkers did make an effort to celebrate, albeit small and awkwardly, as they surprised me with a cake during lunch. There were smiles, laughter, and an unspoken truce in the air. But even then, as I blew out the candles, I had the nagging thought of how easily a simple birthday mention could ignite such confusion and pressure. It made me wonder about how often we unintentionally make simple things complicated for ourselves and others, all while trying to connect. So, was I the asshole? Maybe a bit, but we're all learning how to navigate this tangled web of human interactions together, and perhaps that's the real gift we can give each other. The day after my birthday celebration, I came in to find the atmosphere at the office tinged with tension, like the unsettling silence before a storm. My heart sank a bit. I worried that whatever truce we had formed during the cake outing was fragile, and I hadn't fully realized how profound a small detail, my birthday, could disrupt our workplace harmony. The client, a woman named Sandra, had been with our firm for a couple of years, and though her expectations were often daunting, she had become someone I regarded with a mix of respect and caution. By late morning, just as I was settling into yet another round of emails, she called me into her corner office. With her polished, efficient demeanor, she casually mentioned how my coworkers had eviled my birthday, but then proceeded to express her utter disapproval of their forgetfulness. It's honestly shocking how they didn't even acknowledge it. "Everyone should celebrate those little moments," she said, shaking her head, her tone pointed and almost accusatory. Honestly, I had never thought much about how to gauge others' reactions to my birthday. I disclosed this fact in what I thought was a light-hearted manner, just casual chit-chat, but instead, it felt like I dropped a bomb on her perceptions of my coworkers. The weight of her disappointment settled heavily on my chest, and I stumbled over my words, trying to defend a bunch of well-meaning people who were, admittedly, not always attentive but were far from malicious. As I left her office, an uncomfortable swirl of emotions bubbled inside me. I wondered where negligence ended and ignorance began. Did I have a right to be upset that they hadn't celebrated? Sure, but spending my birthday celebrating with cake brought me joy, not resentment. Still, her words echoed in my mind throughout the day, creating an uneasy tension that gnawed at the back of my brain. As the week progressed, I noticed Sandra growing more agitated with my team. Small complaints escalated into dramatic statements. "I expect better," she said during one of our weekly project meetings, rubbing her temple as if the world's woes lay on her shoulders. My coworkers exchanged glances, their unease felt like a strained rope, nearly ready to snap. I found myself in a precarious position, loving my team while also recognizing Sandra's discomfort, which had blossomed into an incongruous empathy. But did I have a stake in this? Should I have kept my mouth shut about my birthday? It was as if I had unintentionally thrust myself into the role of mediator, which only amplified the urgency of the whole situation. I realized that this spiral could only worsen if my team wanted a solid working relationship with someone as pivotal as Sandra. So, out of sheer desperation, I decided it was time to bring everyone together for an honest chat. I couldn't let this disruption continue swirling without some clarity. I called a meeting, not in the conference room, but in the cozy local cafe down the street, an escape from the intense corporate atmosphere. As I spoke, voicing my feelings about the situation, there was an unexpected silence. I could see the light of recognition flicker in my coworkers' eyes. I was no longer just airing a grievance but revealing my vulnerability. They shared how they sometimes felt lost in the busyness and, admittedly, how they had forgotten dates of significance in their own lives too. It was a moment of liberation, like we were all unwrapping a big fabric blanket that had been suffocating us. Together, we acknowledged that while we didn't celebrate my birthday as we could have, it didn't define how we valued each other. The conversation deepened, evolving into an understanding that we were all learning to respect one another's feelings and acknowledge celebrations big and small. Afterward, I had a real talk with Sandra. It wasn't easy, but I decided to be upfront. I explained that while I appreciated her taking an interest in my birthday, I also saw how this had inadvertently strained relationships within my team. To my surprise, she listened. The hardened front softened just a bit. She admitted it had struck a nerve, realizing she often placed high expectations not just onto others, but on herself as well. It was a reckoning for both of us, one that we navigated into understanding rather than confrontation. And so, while my birthday had sparked something unsettling, it also unearthed an opportunity for connection. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted. There was less tension, more laughter in the office, and even hints of planned celebrations for upcoming occasions. I learned that sometimes being the catalyst for tough conversations wasn't so much about assuming a role of blame or validation but about opening a door for understanding. I felt less like I was wading through unsteady emotional waters and more like I was standing on solid ground. Reflecting on it now, maybe there was never a concrete answer to whether I was the asshole. Maybe what mattered was the fact that we all had to communicate, flawed as we might be, and through that, we grew. I think we're all figuring it out, and who knows? Perhaps the next birthday will be more about the celebration of connection than a single forgotten date. As the weeks rolled on after that birthday, I felt a subtle shift not just within myself, but in the dynamics of the office. It was as if we had collectively let out a breath we didn't even know we were holding. Conversations became easier, lighter, and I could see my coworkers making a real effort to connect beyond just the sterile exchange of emails and deadlines. We had been teetering on the edge of a delicate balance, and somehow, that cake had nudged us back into a healthier rhythm. Here's the thing, I'd always been the quiet one, dragging my feet into the background while my louder colleagues basked in the spotlight. But in this newfound openness, I found myself stepping forward more, sharing ideas during our meetings, even leading a brainstorming session one chilly Thursday morning. The sense of camaraderie grew, and for once, I didn't dread Monday mornings. It was like we were tuning up a symphony, each of us finding our notes and harmonizing together, a far cry from where we had been just the month before. Then came Tasha's email. She was one of the most ambitious project managers I'd ever met, a real firecracker. Her bright personality could light up even the dullest meeting, and maybe because I respected her so much, it stung more when I saw the subject line, "Can I ask a favor?" I braced myself as I clicked it open. She needed help preparing for a presentation, a significant pitch to our higher-ups. The kind of deal that could elevate our entire team. Despite my earlier hesitation, I felt a spark of energy flow through me with the prospect of collaborating with her. There was a boldness in saying yes that I hadn't recognized before. We spent hours piecing together our ideas, and as we worked, I shared a little more of myself, my thoughts, my fears about failing, the weight of those uncelebrated years. "This is good stuff, you know?" Tasha said, her eyes lighting up as she read through the bullet points I had drafted. "You should be more vocal about this stuff, honestly. Don't wait for the others to notice you." I remember chuckling, feeling a warmth spread across my face. After our session, she scooted her chair closer, as if she was initiating a secret mission. "Since you're, actually celebrating birthdays now, What are your thoughts about throwing a little office party next month? Her words lingered long after I left the conference room. Doubts flitted through my mind. What if it was received poorly? What if everyone forgot again? But I silenced those whispers. I wanted to embrace this new sense of connection, to lean into the unpretentious chaos of birthdays and celebrate the chaotic beauty of our imperfect human existence. So I sent out a quirky, light-hearted invitation to the team, asking them to participate in what I cheekily called my half-birthday bash because, sure, why not make it more absurd? I even set up a small wishing wall with sticky notes where everyone could leave behind little notes of encouragement or inside jokes. When the day arrived, there was laughter and genuine excitement. We all wore colorful party hats, and for a moment, none of us were focused on deadlines or corporate structures. We were just a bunch of folks sharing laughter and memories. As we all gathered around the table, I realized I wasn't solely championing the significance of birthdays for my own sake anymore. I was celebrating our efforts to connect in ways that transcended just remembering a date. The simple act of showing up for one another, of taking interest, of daring to be vulnerable amidst laughter and goofy decorations, it meant something far more poignant than I could have articulated a few months ago. I watched as my colleagues swapped stories and shared awkward moments, each little tidbit weaving us closer together. And as I blew out candles again, half a year's worth of dreams and aspirations, I knew that we had moved beyond being just coworkers. We were becoming something more like a family. So, was I the asshole for mentioning my birthday? Maybe, maybe not. In the end, I realized it was never just about that single cake or who remembered what date. It was about giving ourselves permission to be seen, to be celebrated, and to navigate the complexities of our relationships. Maybe, just maybe, the real lesson I learned wasn't about birthdays at all. It was about the richness of presence, of kindness, and allowing each other to grow, one imperfect step at a time. I still remember the night I got the call that changed everything. I was sprawled out on my couch, munching on cold pizza and trying to binge watch a series I had been neglecting. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with my brother Alex's name lighting up the screen, and I paused, shoving a slice aside to answer. He sounded frantic. His dog, Max, had swallowed a toy and was in serious trouble. The vet bills were going to be astronomical, and Alex, who always seemed to live paycheck to paycheck, was in panic mode. I could hear Max whimpering faintly in the background, but what struck me most was the desperation in Alex's voice. He said he'd do anything to save him. Then came the awkward but necessary reminder of the $7,000 I had received as a reimbursement for a recent trip, money that I had earmarked for a much-needed down payment on a car. That dream felt so close, and yet here was my brother, my only family, pleading for help. "I don't know what to do, I can't afford this, please, I'll pay you back," he begged, and I could practically hear Max's tiny heart racing in my imagination. I felt torn apart. I pictured myself in Alex's shoes, drowning in worry, and how helpless I'd feel without the means to help Max. But that money wasn't just meant for my car, it represented stability and independence. With my heart heavy, I said, "Okay, I'll help, but you have to promise to pay me back." The relief in his voice was palpable, but it left me with a knot in my stomach because I knew I was setting aside my own needs, yet another instance of playing the role of the responsible sibling. A month later, I received a text that Alex's vet bills had exceeded my original offer. The more I sat with this, the more my anxiety grew. I had scrimped and saved to take that trip and had budgeted every cent meticulously, only to consider forking it over to Alex without any clear path back to my own goals. When I pressed him for repayment guarantees, he just got defensive. "You don't understand, Claire. This is about saving a life." I was a mix of frustration and guilt, feeling like he was weaponizing Max's health against me. It didn't help that Max had surgery, he was doing better, but I was still financially adrift, and my own bills were piling up. I started to withdraw, hesitating to reach out to my brother, fearing he might expect more from me. Our conversations became strained, every message loaded with unspoken tension. I felt like a villain for wanting my financial security but also a fool for not stepping up more. AITA for not just giving this up? I want to support him, but how can I? I contemplated, sitting on the edge of a precursory decision, my emotions tangled up like a knot I couldn't quite untie. Every day felt like a weigh-in, balancing my love for my brother against my needs. I finally reached out, heart pounding, and we talked it out. He reiterated how grateful he was but made me realize he needed to own his responsibilities, too. In that moment of raw honesty, we both recognized that familial bonds shouldn't be measured in money. We found a way forward, adjusting his payments while developing new understandings of our roles. It's been a month since our conversation, and though Alex still hasn't fully paid me back, I can feel the shift in our dynamic. We're more communicative now, working together on building that sibling bond while slowly repairing our financial strains. I'm still working toward my car and letting go of that guilt that weighed so heavy on my shoulders. As for Max, he seems to be thriving, wagging his tail more than ever, and honestly, the sight of him bouncing around has been worth every unspent dollar. Life goes on, and so do we. I never thought that a dog could teach humans so much about resilience and love, but here we are. Sitting in my living room on a rainy Saturday morning, I watch Max sprawled out on the couch, belly up, legs splayed like he owns the place. His existence has brought this unexpected joy into our lives, a bright spot amid the turbulent waters we've been navigating. As I sip my coffee, I think back to where it all started, the phone call from Alex that threw our family finances into disarray. At first, it felt like a betrayal when he asked me for the money I had reimbursed for our trip. $7,000 was no small amount, especially when it had been earmarked for my car payments. But the moment he voiced his concern about Max's health, suddenly I wasn't just considering my expenses, I was wrestling with the moral weight of my decision. Was I being selfish for holding on to what was technically mine, even if it could help save a life? That hum of internal conflict lingered for days. I remember pacing my apartment late at night, phone in hand, my mind racing with thoughts of Alex's mounting vet bills and the reality of Max's situation, a mix of concern for my brother and the loyalty I felt toward my own responsibilities. Our late-night conversations grew more profound, more vulnerable. I started understanding that Alex wasn't just my brother but also a guy who felt trapped, scared, and desperately in love with his dog. It shifted something in our relationship. My decision not to transfer that money immediately felt like an anchor in this new, tumultuous sea we were sailing. Over time, as I slowly began to find my footing again through little jobs and gig opportunities, I'd worked out a plan to address my own financial concerns without abandoning him completely. I agreed to help him with a fraction of the costs because I knew that Max's well-being weighed heavier on his heart than any financial burden I was carrying. Then there was that one Saturday morning after Alex had worked late into the night just to bring in some extra cash. I could see the exhaustion drawn on his face. I made us both a hearty breakfast, scrambled eggs with toast and avocado, and set it on the kitchen table. The smell of the coffee brewing and the sizzle of the eggs seemed to wake him from a stupor, and as he sat down, I could feel the tension easing between us a little more. "You didn't have to do this," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I'm fine managing on my own, you know." "Yeah, but I think we both need this," I replied, feeling the warmth of our moment. That morning felt different. As we shared stories about our childhood, about fights over whether we were going to eat cereal or a sandwich for dinner, that affectionate banter we held so dear, I noticed our walls were coming down. I could see how much he cared about Max, and I was easing into my own role of support rather than a reluctant benefactor. By now, it was clear that our relationship was morphing. Thanks to late-night chats, hearty breakfasts, and those small decisions to be there for each other, I could finally release the tension built up from those days of resentment and guilt. As the weeks rolled on, I found that seeing Max bounce around with energy made the guilt of not having my car more bearable. Each evening, I would join Alex on walks with Max, enjoying the fresh air. We'd talk about silly things, music, movies, and his latest attempts at becoming a TikTok sensation. I never imagined the world of dog stardom could be so competitive, but seeing him get more animated discussing it lifted my spirits. And sure, things aren't perfect yet. There are still disagreements about finances and the lingering edge of unfulfilled expectations regarding repayment, but we're working through it together. It's less of a transaction and more about reconnecting. We're nurturing our connection instead of guarding our pockets. I still want my car, and I still don't have all my ducks in a row financially, but I've come to realize that there's something more valuable in these moments with Alex and Max. Life is messy, and sometimes we end up in these tangled webs, but as I stare at Max now, I recognize that we're all figuring it out in our own time, one paw, $1, and one fragile bond at a time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the living room where I sat with Alex, both of us fully enveloped in a narrative that was still very much in progress. Max, his soft golden fur catching the light just right, lay sprawled on the floor, blissfully unaware of the intricacies of human transactions and expectations. The vigor with which he played with his squeaky toy felt like an innocently perfect metaphor for the simplicity we all sometimes overlook. It was moments like this that made me realize how worth it was to prioritize relationships over finances, no matter how tempting it was to cling to the cold, hard numbers that dictated our realities. I glanced at Alex, who was focused on his phone, probably debating whether to text the veterinary clinic about Max's follow-up appointment. There was a new tenderness to our interactions. The shadows of previous conversations no longer seemed to linger like an unwelcome cloud above us. Instead, they were softer now, like hints of rain, bringing life to dry earth. "Hey," I said, breaking through his concentration. "You know I'm proud of you, right? For making decisions that are best for Max." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face momentarily before his features settled into an almost shy smile. "Yeah? Thanks," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck, a young habit he hadn't outgrown. "Sometimes it feels like I'm just flailing around," I chuckled, shaking my head. "We all are. And flailing is totally okay. Just means we're trying." The energy in the room shifted again, a sort of understanding settling in the space around us. It was a reminder of our childhood days, silly but honest adventures where flailing often resulted in laughter. With each conversation, we shared not only the events of our days but also our vulnerabilities, our doubts. I found solace in sharing my worries about my finances. Sometimes I would even admit my lingering desires for that car while Alex voiced his fears about the vet bills piling up and how they would affect his already meager budget. Yet, there we were, two adults learning that money isn't the core of our bond but merely a side note. As if on cue, Max leapt up, capturing our attention as he chased his toy across the room, skidding slightly as he turned a corner too quickly. "Super dog," I shouted playfully and tossed his ball toward the kitchen. His excitement was infectious, and for a few moments, we watched him, both of us chuckling at the silliness of it all. It wasn't lost on me how Max had somehow tethered us back together in a way that money never could. He was family, and sustaining him meant nourishing our relationship too. There was still a long road ahead. I could feel the weight of unfulfilled promises and unpaid bills lingering, but each day of shared responsibilities felt like a little victory. I had let go of the need to keep precise accounts between us. Our relationship was worth more than dollar signs. Instead, I focused on being there when Alex called for moral support and being flexible when it came to managing my own financial expectations. Weeks went by and the dynamic continued to shift from necessity to genuine connection. Sometimes, while Alex was working late or volunteering with Max at the local shelter, I'd steal moments for myself, negotiating my own budgets, trying to find a way to carve out a new sense of financial independence. Instead of pressuring myself to rebalance the scales, I began to find joy in little luxuries, a fancy coffee after a long day or a new book to immerse myself in. It wasn't about recklessness but rather a practice in nurturing my own happiness alongside my obligations to my brother and his dog. One evening, sprawled comfortably on the couch, Alex and I watched an old movie together, the kind that stretched between dramas and comedies, filled with awkward pauses and inopportune moments. Max was nestled between us, snoring softly as we munched on popcorn. I felt a serene sense of contentment washing over me. It struck me that the burdens I thought were too heavy to carry were lightened even just by sharing the journey with someone else. I didn't know if I would ever get that car, and honestly, it started to feel relatively trivial against the backdrop of healing that was happening. Each time I saw Max bounded around, or caught a glimpse of Alex's genuine laughter, I recognized that the recalibration of our lives didn't need to revolve around a reimbursement of $7,000 after all. As the credits rolled and the room was filled with warmth from the setting sun, I smiled, grateful for both the challenges and the small victories that continually reshaped my understanding of family and commitment. Whatever came next, be it car ownership or new financial goals, would ultimately be secondary to the connections made, patched up, and reinforced through this journey of shared learning, love, and, of course, one wagging tail at a time. I never thought I'd find myself standing on the deck of our Airbnb, the salty breeze tangling my hair, trying to figure out how to keep my brother-in-law away from my kids. It all started when I decided to invite my husband's family for a week at the beach. The idea was to create some lasting memories, let the kids play in the surf, and reconnect as a family. But then there was Greg, my sister-in-law's husband. He wasn't a bad guy, but he had this incessant knack for teasing the kids. It began as harmless banter, but soon his jokes turned sharp. I watched as my 6-year-old, Mia, came back to me in tears after Greg's joke about her being a slow swimmer. And then it escalated the next day when Greg pointed out that my 8-year-old son, Jake, couldn't hit a baseball to save his life, all while pretending to take a swing himself. At first, I brushed it off. Just Greg being Greg, I told myself, the mantra echoing in my head as I tried to chalk it up to some misguided humor. But as the days rolled by, I found myself anxious in his presence, hoping he wouldn't take another jab at my kids, dreading the next meltdown. We were here to have fun, not for my children to feel belittled. It all came to a head one afternoon. We were packing up a cooler for a family outing when Greg took a playful jab at Mia again, this time something about her not being able to build a sandcastle to save her life. I felt a heat rising inside me, a protective instinct sparking. "Hey, Greg," I said, my tone sharper than I intended, "if you don't stop picking on my kids, you won't be invited on the trip tomorrow." The words hung in the air, shocking everyone into silence. Greg looked taken aback, and I could feel the weight of his gaze. My sister-in-law's mouth dropped open in disbelief. The kids froze, wide-eyed, unsure how to react. I felt a rush of guilt wash over me. Was I too harsh? But then all I could see were my kids' bruised little hearts. That night, I lay awake, replaying the event over and over in my mind. Was I the jerk for stepping in? Should I have handled it differently? Maybe I could have talked to him privately, but I felt like my only choices were to protect my children or to stay silent and watch them suffer. The next day, Greg didn't come with us. He stayed back at the house, leaving a cold silence in his absence. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. The kids splashed and built sandcastles, unbothered and free, but I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I had created a rift. Later, as we gathered for dinner, I felt the tension at the table. Greg's absence loomed large, and I braced myself for the conversation that was bound to come. My sister-in-law finally broke the silence. "You know he really meant no harm, right?" she said cautiously. "He can be a bit rough around the edges, but he loves the kids." I felt my chest tighten. Love shouldn't hurt, I thought, and that wasn't enough of a justification for me. I took a deep breath and voiced my side about the impact of his words, how they affected my kids. There was a strange moment of quiet understanding, a space where we both recognized the complexities of family dynamics. By the end of the week, Greg and I had a quiet resolution. He apologized in his own awkward fashion, a half-hearted joke, but I could see sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't perfect, but we reached a temporary peace. I left feeling like a warrior for my kids, and an uneasy truce was found among family ties. It's been a month since then, and while the trip was awkward, I think it helped all of us realize where the lines were drawn. The kids are blooming, their laughter a reminder of what family should be. But I still check in on myself. Was I too protective? AITA for trying to stand up for my children? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a sign of the protective grit that comes with being a mom. I may not have all the answers, but for now, I'll keep holding the line, even if it gets messy sometimes. Life continues to be a delicate balance, doesn't it? I never thought I would find myself reflecting so deeply on the dynamics of family, especially not after that unnerving vacation with my brother-in-law, Marco. Each day, as I watch my kids blossom into their vibrant selves, I'm reminded of how pivotal that moment was for us, how one uncomfortable confrontation shifted our family's narrative. I was always the laid-back parent, the one who encouraged my kids to express themselves, make mistakes, and learn from them. But seeing Marco constantly undercut them, his teasing slipping casually into mean-spirited jabs, flipped a switch in me. In those moments of hurt, the quiet desperation of wanting to protect my children surged forth. I realized standing up for them meant drawing boundaries, even with family, and that realization opened my eyes to a truth I had previously dismissed. Not all adults understand that their words hold weight, especially around impressionable little souls. That conflict continues to echo in my mind. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I question if I went too far. Was I too protective? A part of me wishes I could have been more diplomatic, but then the images of my children's sad little faces flash through my mind, and I feel a surge of clarity again. I can't let them believe that mockery is a form of love. My heart aches at the thought that they might think that's acceptable behavior from anyone, let alone family. We've been discussing feelings a lot lately, what makes them sad, what makes them happy, and just 2 nights ago, when my eldest, Lily, informed me with her big, inquisitive eyes that Marco's jokes don't make her feel very good, I felt the validation I needed. I didn't just protect them, I opened a door for them to voice their feelings, to confront me about their struggles, and to understand that they deserve respect. As we've shifted back to normalcy, I've noticed how the kids have adjusted. They're more confident, filling the house with giggles that rattle the windows. "Can we have dance parties again, Mom?" they chirp, eyes sparkling with glee. I chuckle at how they've commandeered the living room with vibrant arts and crafts, their artwork peppered across the refrigerator, chaotic yet beautiful splashes of color that reflect their exuberance. But underneath all that laughter, I occasionally catch a subtle hesitation when they encounter playful comments or teasing. It lingers there, a thread of their past experiences with Marco that they have yet to untangle. As for Marco, he's made an effort to check in more often post-vacation, sending messages filled with jokes that, to me, seem rehearsed. He even tried to connect with the kids over video chats, asking them silly riddles they just rolled their eyes at, but they let him. They understand it's an olive branch of sorts. It feels awkward but hopeful, like both parties are treading on the shattered remains of boundaries restored. I am still here, a vigilant sentinel, keeping an eye on the situation, monitoring how it unfolds. My feelings continue to be a complex tapestry sewn from protective instincts, nervousness, and a deep, unwavering love for my children. I think this time around, I'll open up an honest dialogue, perhaps even share how I felt about our family dynamics in that moment of conflict. It could be uncomfortable, but isn't that what growth requires? Vulnerability often breeds understanding. Family isn't always about the perfect moments captured in photo albums, it's about navigating the messiness together and giving each other the grace to grow. So, even if our journey gets rough, I believe that as long as we're willing to confront issues, to speak about our feelings, and approach our relationships with empathy, we'll emerge stronger. But oh, what a ride it's been, learning the limits of love and protection. Maybe one day, I'll sit down with Marco, share a cup of coffee, and talk openly about stepping on toes in the name of humor and bonding. Until then, though, I will keep nurturing the life and laughter weaving through our home, aware that family means tending to the tangled relationships with a lot of heart and patience. For now, we're a work in progress, embracing the imperfections of being together and armed with the strength to keep evolving. As the month rolled on from that awkward family vacation, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I watched my kids, Felix, the 6-year-old with an imagination as vast as the sky, and Mia, my 9-year-old whose heart seemed bigger than her petite frame, blossom in ways that warmed my heart. They giggled more, flung themselves into their playdates with unabashed enthusiasm, and I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Their laughter echoed in our home, echoing reminders that joy can reign even amid the tangled threads of family dynamics. The kitchen buzzed with life, it became our sanctuary. The aroma of fresh cookie dough and the sound of Felix's spaceship adventures filled every nook. I snuck peeks at Mia as she crafted her latest masterpiece, a rainbow drawing that had multiple family members within colorful stick figures, each one labeled by name like they were some kind of comic character. It struck me just how resilient kids can be, how they adapt and thrive, but it also made me hyper-aware of the fragility of that resilience in the face of hurtful antics. After that vacation, Marco still had a way of trying to be the funny guy, but I noticed a softer approach. He'd tone it down noticeably, his need for laughs taking second place to keeping the peace with me and the kids. I found solace in this reset. Then one day, as I stood at the threshold of the living room, my heart swelled at the sight of my children playing a game of cards with Marco. They were bent over the table, exchanging stories through shouts and giggles, and for a moment, the past tensions felt like a distant memory. Still, the cautious mom in me remained vigilant. One afternoon, Marco called to chat. It was curious how easily we fell back into the ebb and flow of conversation, the casual banter of family. You know, he started, I've been thinking about how I joke with the kids. There was hesitance in his voice, a tentative honesty that made my heart soften. I didn't mean to cross any lines. I thought it was all in good fun. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around my mug, hot steam wafting toward my face. I know you didn't. But humor is a tricky thing, especially when it can feel so personal. Kids have a way of wearing their hearts on their sleeves, and I think sometimes they don't see the bigger picture in jokes. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing my words. Yeah. I get that. I guess I've been learning that just being an uncle isn't just about the fun and games. It's about being someone they can rely on too. I could hear the sincerity in his tone, and it felt refreshing. We ended our conversation with an unspoken understanding, the kind that lingers in the air long after the words have been said. It was a step forward, albeit a small one, like a cautious baby taking its first steps. That weekend, we hosted a family barbecue, the kind filled with laughter, sizzling burgers, and kids darting through the yard as they played tag. Marco was there, ready as ever to delve into games with Felix, which he did with a newfound gentleness. When Mia proudly showcased the drawings she created in art class, he knelt down, genuinely interested. "Is that me?" he asked, carefully pointing to a stick figure that had spiky hair and a wide grin. It struck me how, right then, there was a bridge forming between them, an unintentional bond shaped by respect rather than humor. In that moment, I realized that building a family isn't about perfection but about navigating the chaos together. As the evening wound down and dusk dipped its fingers across the sky, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. My children were thriving, Marco was evolving, and I was learning to let go just a little bit, trusting that our relationships could be nurtured rather than forced. Perhaps that was the real lesson. We're all imperfect, bumping against each other, yet it's in this beautifully chaotic dance where the most profound growth occurs. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I pressed a kiss against their foreheads, my heart swelling with gratitude for the messy, vibrant tapestry of family life. I may not have all the answers, but a sense of hope lingered in the air, a blossoming understanding that we're all doing our best, one day at a time. So, look, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. I'm a single parent to a quirky 7-year-old named Lily, and life is already a bit chaotic as it is, balancing work and school schedules while ensuring my kid has a stable home environment. For the most part, I've tried to keep things light and flowing. But then there's my Aunt Claire, bless her heart, who's always had this knack for pushing my buttons. She's one of those well-meaning relatives who just can't help but give unsolicited advice, and a lot of it revolves around how I'm raising Lily. Everything from what she eats to how I let her express herself creatively, which includes glitter, a lot of glitter. Recently, we had a family gathering for my brother's birthday, and it felt like Aunt Claire was on a mission. I could see her shooting judgmental glances my way whenever she thought Lily was being too loud or too independent, like a hawk stalking its prey. Finally, when she suggested I should take Lily's art supplies away because she thought they were too messy, something inside me just snapped. I remember looking at her, my palms sweaty, and saying something like, "Aunt Claire, if you can't respect my decisions as a parent, then maybe it's best if Lily doesn't come over anymore." The room fell silent, and I instantly regretted saying it, even as the words left my mouth. I could see the shock on her face, and I immediately felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I overreacting? Was I really okay with cutting my kid off from one of the few safe spaces she had, just to make a stand? I could almost hear my aunt's heart breaking, but it wasn't just her heartbreak that weighed on me. I felt the burden of being the bad guy in my own family story. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the confrontation in my head, grappling with feelings of anger directed toward Aunt Claire for being so critical, and guilt for possibly taking something away from Lily that she enjoyed. A few days later, she called me, voice trembling, to ask if we could have a chat. When we met, I could tell she was hurt, but she quickly shifted gears to talking about how she feels she's just looking out for Lily. I snapped back like a rubber band. "I'm doing the best I can. If you feel that I'm not, then don't come around." After that, I felt awful, but also strangely liberated. My responsibility is to Lily, to protect her joy and creativity. Weeks passed without Aunt Claire, and honestly, Lily asked about her once or twice, but I brushed it off, trying to maintain a brave front. Then the real kicker happened. I overheard Lily talking to her friend about how she didn't want to go to Aunt Claire's house anyway because adults should let kids be kids. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow, and I knew something had shifted. I kept reflecting on whether it was worth it to stand my ground, and while I missed the idea of family dinners and the warmth they brought, I realized my first priority is protecting my daughter from unrealistic expectations. Time marched on, and eventually, Aunt Claire reached out to see if we could start fresh, possibly meet up for donuts at our favorite bakery. I hesitated but texted back, "Let's try." I still don't know if I'm entirely ready to forgive, but as I write this, I feel hopeful. Maybe we could learn to communicate better, create a new understanding. Who knows? Maybe even my Aunt Claire will learn that sometimes, love means letting go a little. So where does that leave me? Honestly, still a little unsure but standing firm in my convictions. AITA? I guess it's all part of this messy parenting journey. As I sat in my tiny kitchen, steam swirling up from the coffee mug cradled between my palms, I couldn't shake the mix of apprehension and anticipation that clung to me after Claire's message. It felt like pulling on an old sweater that I used to adore but had somehow forgotten the fit of. I replayed our last encounter over and over in my head. My mind flickered back to the confrontation at my son's birthday party, the glares exchanged over the toppings for the cake. "It's gluten-free, Aunt Claire, because Danny has a sensitivity," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady as she argued that I was being overprotective. Every word of my conviction had been met with a wave of indignation from her, a woman who had once been my confidant, my ally in navigating the familial chaos. I couldn't help but feel the weight of disappointment settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yes, Aunt Claire had always been a source of wisdom, her stories rich with familial lore, but somewhere along the way, respect for my parenting decisions had dissolved into a pile of unsolicited advice and judgment. So here I was, contemplating a meetup that could potentially heal old wounds while still feeling the prick of betrayal. When I agreed to try, it felt like I was tiptoeing back to a place I used to know, a place that felt welcoming yet dangerous. Would this conversation lead to understanding or reignite old arguments? Would it be a stepping stone towards rebuilding or just another attempt to bulldoze my boundaries? My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a reminder pinging me about the donut date. This wasn't just coffee with a friend, it involved family dynamics that felt more complicated than navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. The clatter of my son's toys in the background momentarily distracted me, grounding me in my role as a mother, the constant evaluator of who gets to influence my child's life. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that parenting is as much about creating a safe space for my son as it is about ensuring he understands the nuances of relationships. The next morning, I found myself outside our favorite bakery, the scent of warm pastries flooding my senses. Claire was already there when I arrived, her coffee in hand, her expression a strange mix of hopeful and apologetic. "Hey," I said softly, an uncertain smile creeping on my face. She looked a bit older, perhaps weighed down by life's burdens or the realization, possibly, that she had crossed lines. We chatted about the usual, the weather, what a rainstorm had done to our childhood tree fort, but there it was, lingering beneath the surface, that tension between what I hoped we could be and the reality of our strained relationship. "I know I haven't been the best aunt," Claire said, her eyes fixed on the donut display like she was trying to find the right words hiding among the pastries. I wanted to believe her, to embrace this moment, but doubt bubbled within me. It's hard for me to see you navigate parenting. I feel like I have so much to offer, but maybe it's not what you want." Her honesty was refreshing yet disarming, and I found myself wrestling with the desire to let her back into my life, while also keeping my son out of the line of fire. "I appreciate that, Claire," I replied, my heart racing. "But it's crucial for me to set boundaries, especially for Danny's sake. I want him to grow up feeling safe and understood, not under scrutiny." As I spoke, I registered the flicker of realization in her eyes, a softened understanding. We spent the next hour unpacking the layers of our relationship, trying to navigate what love looks like when respect feels fragile. I shared my experiences as a single parent, how the choices I made were never arbitrary but deeply considered, always revolving around my child's well-being. And to my surprise, Claire listened, really listened. I caught moments where her expression shifted from defensiveness to contemplation, as if she was beginning to grasp that our love might need to take on a different shape. We hugged before parting ways, an uncertain but genuine gesture. As I drove home, a sense of cautious optimism filled me. It felt like we had planted the seeds for a new beginning, though I knew they would take time to grow. Would she fully respect my parenting choices? Only time would tell. After all, trust is like a delicate flower, it takes patience to bloom again after being trampled. That evening, as Danny clambered onto my lap for story time, I felt the warmth of possibility surrounding us. Sure, I was still a little unsure, still grappling with the anxiety that came with family dynamics, but I felt lighter. AITA? Maybe in someone's narrative, but in mine, it felt more like I was pushing through the chaos, determined to carve out our peace. I sighed contentedly, holding my son tighter, hoping both Claire and I were learning that forgiveness is often found in the spaces between boundaries and bravery. That evening, as we sat on the couch with the soft light from a nearby lamp casting a gentle glow around us, I couldn't help but marvel at how sweetly innocent Danny was. He squirmed a bit, all too eager to dive into his favorite story. "Mom, read me the one with the dragon," he chirped, his little arms flapping with excitement. I grinned, the kind of smile that muscles in your face almost forget how to make until a moment like this brings it back. I pulled him closer, the sweet smell of his freshly washed hair drifting upward, wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. It was magical how one little creature had the power to transform a tumultuous day into something warm and bright, yet deep down, I still felt that twinge of unease about Claire. It's funny how life has this way of testing your limits. After our spat, I had launched into a whirlwind of introspection, replaying every argument, every well-meaning but misguided advice she'd offered, as if retracing my steps might uncover the right answer. Understanding what I wanted from our relationship was one hurdle, but keeping Danny safe from the fallout felt like climbing a mountain in stilettos. I felt at that moment, cradling the little joy in my arms, that he was my best shot at a serene future. As we settled into the story, Danny clapped and giggled at the silly voices I used for the characters. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. What if Claire, in her stubbornness, couldn't respect my boundaries again? I wanted my son to grow without the weight of adult conflicts pressing down on him. The heavy thought stuck with me like a burr under my skin. When I put him to bed later, I stood in the doorway watching him drift off, the soft rhythm of his breathing echoing back to me the peacefulness I wished for our family. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and I nearly jumped, pulling it from my pocket. Claire was texting again. A simple message this time, thinking about that donut date. Do you think we can get it right this time? I stared at the screen, my heart ambivalent, caught somewhere between wanting to build bridges and fearing the crumbling of foundations. I typed and deleted, before finally settling on a cautious, I hope so. But there are some things we need to discuss first. I hit send, a mixture of hopeful optimism and drumming dread billowing inside me. The next morning, I sipped my coffee, staring out the window, the soft rays illuminating the world outside. I thought about how the hardest conversations often end up being the most crucial. Finding a balance between love, boundaries, and forgiveness, it felt less like a checklist and more like a dance. A complicated one. When our donut date rolled around, I wore a smile that only half masked my nervousness. Danny sat beside me, oblivious to the underlying currents, munching on a glazed treat and occasionally dipping into my plate for the sprinkles. Claire arrived, and as she walked through the bakery door, I saw a hint of the old warmth in her eyes, but behind it lay uncertainty. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the patience that comes with healing. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the ice as we settled into a booth. "I believe in giving this a second shot. But we need some ground rules." "What are you talking about?" She responded, a hint of confusion in her voice, her brow wrinkling. I felt my heart race as I tried to articulate what I had been mulling over for weeks. "It's just, when it comes to Danny, I need you to respect my decisions as a parent." The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, shifting the mood between us. Claire's expression wavered, shifting from surprise to contemplation. "I understand. I think I've been stubborn about how I view things, and maybe it's time for a new perspective," she eventually admitted, reaching for a napkin as if to wipe away unspoken tension. As we talked, nibbling on donuts and sipping coffee, a sort of thaw took place. We laid raw feelings on the table, sharing our histories and misunderstandings, each crumb of pastry like a building block toward repairing our fractured relationship. I could see that she genuinely wanted to make amends, but the real test would be in her actions moving forward. Later, outside the bakery, Danny bounced ahead of us, trailing his fingers along the brick wall and giggling as he tried to capture every shadow cast by the trees overhead. In that moment, witnessing his innocent joy, I turned to Claire and said, "Thank you for showing up today." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied, her voice softer, more genuine. "I really want to be a part of his life, our lives, but I promise I will respect the boundaries you've set." As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling through me. Maybe I had been too cautious in some ways, but I didn't think I was the villain of this story. I was just a mom trying to carve out a safe and loving space for her son while balancing the complexities of family entanglements. I hugged Danny a little tighter as we walked home, whispering to him that life is often imperfect but always worth navigating together. As he chattered away about his favorite dragon stories, I realized that even when it feels chaotic, there's beauty and growth, both in ourselves and in relationships. So, was I the asshole? Maybe to some, but in this chapter of my life, as messy as it was, I was simply doing my best to foster love and understanding. The journey was still unfolding, but I felt ready for what came next, embracing the hope that blooms even in the darkest corners. It started as an innocent Saturday dinner at my place, a gathering of friends to unwind after a long week. I had just moved into this charming little apartment downtown, and my excitement to show it off had reached a peak. The scent of garlic and lemon wafted through the air as I grilled some delicious veggie skewers and sautéed shrimp for those who weren't adhering to special diets. Among the group was Lisa, my close friend since college, who had recently identified as pescatarian after not touching red meat for years. I respected her choice, but I knew her habits could sometimes waver in social settings, especially with good food around. It was almost comical how she would swoon over my culinary decisions, her large brown eyes lighting up with excitement at each platter I presented. As the evening unfolded with laughter and wine, I watched her dive into the shrimp with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. It was amusing until it suddenly struck me, an unsettling thought, as if a fog had drifted into my usually clear mind. "Hey, Lisa," I said, attempting to tease her lightly, "you know if you eat that, you might as well wave goodbye to your pescatarian label." Everyone laughed, but I was only half joking. I could see the glimmer of guilt in her eyes flicker and fade as she popped another shrimp into her mouth. The atmosphere shifted slightly, we all resumed our chatter, but I could sense her internal struggle bubbling beneath the surface, like the tension of a taut string ready to snap. Eventually, the night made its inevitable descent into messy revelations, and we all plopped down on the couch, a few drinks in hand. That's when she admitted it. "You know," she began hesitantly, "sometimes, I wonder if I really want to be pescatarian. The way everyone went to town on your food tonight. I felt like I was missing out." It was clear that she was wrestling with herself. She'd always been passionate about her choice for ethical reasons, yet every time she encountered temptation, she felt more and more conflicted. I sighed, struggling with the gravity of what I was about to say. I didn't want to sound harsh, but the truth was nagging at me. "Look, Lisa," I started, choosing my words carefully, "it's your choice, and I respect it, you know that. But if you can't resist shrimp on occasion and it's giving you this much anxiety, maybe you need to reevaluate why you're doing it. It's okay to admit you want to enjoy food, even if it doesn't fit into one label or another." The room fell quiet, the air thickening with unspoken sentiment, and I could feel the weight of my statement sinking into my gut. I could read her face like a book: confusion, frustration, anger. She snapped back, "So, it's my fault I ate meat? Thanks for making me feel like a monster." That stung, more than I expected it would. I felt my heart race, a familiar surge of defensiveness rushing up like a wave. I didn't want to be the villain in her narrative. "No, that's not what I meant," I stammered, my voice softening. "I just think it's important to own our choices, you know? If you're really struggling, maybe it's time to rethink how rigid you want to be." My intentions glimmered under the weight of her hurt, and I regretted my delivery. After a few moments of silence that felt like an eternity, she sighed deeply, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. "I guess. It just feels hard sometimes, navigating these choices in a world full of delicious foods. Maybe I need to reconsider how I label myself," she admitted, her voice quieter. I could sense we both were still processing. It was complicated, like a beautiful, messy tapestry of feelings engaged in an unresolvable dance. Later that night, as the remnants of our feast lay scattered around us and we finally drifted into lighter conversations again, I felt a poignant shift. I wasn't sure if my words had genuinely struck a chord, but something shifted in her demeanor. I realized that, in trying to signal her toward her own truth, I hadn't meant to reprimand her. Instead, it felt like we were both involved in a delicate dance of self-discovery, two friends navigating the overpowering waves of guilt and desire in a chaotic sea of culinary choices. Months later, I received a text from her. "Hey, started trying some new things in the kitchen too, like I'm experimenting with being less strict with my vegetarianism. Thanks for that night, really." I smiled at the screen, relieved. It reaffirmed something vital. We weren't just friends tossing around labels, we were evolving together, reshaping our identities and learning to embrace the shades of gray instead of the rigid divisions we'd created. It was early evening when I received that text, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting my living room a soft gold. I could feel the warmth wrap around me like a familiar blanket, but there was a strange intensity bubbling inside. I was relieved, yes, but a part of me couldn't help but gnaw on the edges of that moment. The weight of our past conversation lingered. I remembered how tense it had felt after she took that first bite of steak at the grill, the way her eyes widened in disbelief and almost guilt, like she'd broken an unspoken rule. "You know it's not just steak, right? It's about understanding our choices," I'd said, words spilling out before I caught myself. I felt like a counselor and a friend at once, grappling with my own frustrations about rigidity and rules in a friendship that should have room for exploration. That night, our laughter had mingled with the smoke from the grill, but the air had also been thick with an unaddressed tension. I found myself worrying how our culinary debate had left her feeling. Yet here she was now, admitting that she had begun playing with those rigid lines we once underlined so boldly. I felt a sense of pride wash over me, an unexpected warmth to see her moving past the guilt that had shadowed her for months. I typed back, careful yet upbeat, "Really? That's awesome. It's about what feels right for you, not what we think it should be." I hit send and slumped back into the couch, heart racing slightly. It reminded me of that old saying, to be true to oneself, but how hard it can be. I often struggled with that truth too and realized that questioning things, especially our choices in domains as personal and emotive as food, was not just a trait of culinary exploration, it was a manifestation of a larger conversation about identity. I glanced at my half-empty plate from dinner, the remnants of my own dietary decisions. I'd been having seafood, mostly, saving myself from the more unpalatable choice of red meat. Was it that different from her shift? Is it really just about the food, or is it about comfort in the chaos of adulthood, growing, bending, and reshaping ourselves? Days turned into weeks, and those philosophical inquiries played in my mind as background music, mingling with the sweet aroma of my kitchen experiments. I swiped through my social media later and saw her post, an impeccable plate of sautéed vegetables with shrimp, vibrant and mouthwatering. The caption read, "Just because I love plants doesn't mean I can't embrace a bit of the sea, right?" I chuckled, an involuntary sense of triumph swelling in my chest. She was molding her narrative and allowing the waves of culinary joy to drown out the self-imposed storms of guilt. It made me want to push my boundaries too. Perhaps I could venture into vegetarian dishes beyond my comfort zone. Somewhere in that back and forth of support and experimentation, we found ourselves interwoven, each dish a tile in a mosaic of our friendship. I realized that her choice, or the softening of her restrictions, didn't negatively impact our connection, it only deepened it. One weekend, we agreed to cook together again, a full few hours reserved for culinary exploration. As we diced and chopped, we talked freely, about our lives, our aspirations, the uncertainty swirling around us like the steam from the pans. By the time we tasted our third dish, the vulnerability we both carried transformed into a playful banter. "So if I make my famous crab cakes next week, can you handle the temptation?" she teased, and I couldn't help but throw my head back in laughter. Temptation? Oh, come on. I'll still be here, side by side, in this delicious gray zone, I replied. And suddenly, it felt less like a debate and more like exploration, a shared journey through choices seasoned with genuine care and understanding. I leaned on the counter, ready to whisk my hands into the next dish, feeling our friendship getting thicker, hearty like the meal we were about to create. Life is messy, and the lines are often blurred, but in that kitchen, amidst laughter and the inviting aroma of shared meals, I felt alive, truly, deeply alive. I couldn't predict the future, or if she'd return to a stricter vegetarian path, but I realized it hardly mattered. We were simply living, exploring, shaping ourselves with each meal shared, every step an invitation to experience the beautiful chaos together. That afternoon, with sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to my friend. As I set about chopping vegetables, bright peppers, fragrant garlic, and crisp spinach, I could practically sense her presence beside me. We had planned to conjure up a new recipe together. We called it Meal Assembly Gone Wild, an excuse to toss everything we had on hand into one big bowl and see what happened. It wasn't just about food, it was a metaphor for where we were in life, melding our separate journeys into something vibrant, unique, and delicious. Just as I reached for the onions, my thoughts drifted back to that fateful dinner months ago, when she had taken a forkful of the salmon, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is so good, but what if I regret it later?" she asked, laughter bubbling just under the surface of her conflicted expression. Now, with each clatter of the pan and splash of sauce, I realized we had both changed since that night. We had stepped away from rigid definitions and found invigorating freedom in playing with the rules. "Hey, maybe we could throw in some shrimp for a little kick?" I called out to her, eyebrows raised playfully. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the imaginary scales of her vegetarianism before nodding eagerly. "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." And just like that, we tumbled deeper into our culinary exploration, an unwritten agreement forming in the air between us, that this space was safe for experimentation, for letting go, for embracing the pleasure of the unexpected. As the aromas mingled and enveloped us, rich and enticing, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, her smile wide as she mixed ingredients with wild abandon. It echoed the joyful spirit this journey had instilled in her. There was a new confidence in the way she moved, a contrast to the uncertainty that used to shroud her culinary choices. I felt proud, not just of our dish, but of her bravery to navigate the ambiguity of her identity. It felt like we both were adding layers to ourselves, new textures and flavors that complemented who we had always been at our core. "Do you think this would make a good post for the blog?" she asked, tossing a playful strand of hair over her shoulder. She loved sharing our culinary escapades online, a creative outlet that gave her an avenue to connect with others exploring similar paths. I nodded, grinning. Absolutely. And we can call it dancing with delicacies, a pescatarian journey or something cheeky like that. Our laughter rang through the kitchen, warm and easy, a reminder that moments like these were worth cherishing. As we plated our creation, the vibrant colors inviting and bold, I felt a warmth blossom in my chest, a realization that this friendship had transformed into something richer than I ever anticipated. We had wandered outside the boundaries we once imposed on each other and found a deeper bond through the art of sharing meals. It was about honoring our individual choices while still celebrating every messy, beautiful meal we pulled together. Later, as we sank into the clinking of forks against plates, I took a moment to observe her. She was savoring each bite, letting flavors linger on her tongue as memories intertwined with our laughter. I suddenly felt the urge to share something, an acknowledgement of our journey, our vulnerability. You know, I said, looking straight at her, I didn't want to tell you how to feel about your food choices, but I did want you to know it was okay to explore. You remind me that life doesn't come wrapped up in neat packages. Her gaze softened, and after swallowing, she replied with a thoughtful nod. And you remind me that it's okay to step beyond the labels we put on ourselves. This journey with you is exactly what I needed, to stop fearing the gray areas. Our conversation ebbed and flowed across the table just like the food, intertwining and rich. As we cleaned up, I reflected on how, for each forkful we took, it was more than just a fusion of flavors, it was a celebration of friendship, acceptance, and the beautiful mess of growing together. I didn't know where her culinary exploration would lead next or how her relationship with food and identity would continue to evolve, but I felt a sense of calm in the uncertainty. We were both learning to embrace the chaos and quirks of life without the need for rigid definitions, a true friendship woven tighter with every meal shared. I still remember the excitement I felt leading up to my 30th birthday party. It wasn't just another year, it felt like a milestone, a moment to cherish, surrounded by friends and laughter. I planned everything meticulously. The decorations were vibrant, the food was catered from my favorite local eatery, and I'd even hired a small band to play some live music. My close friends were excited, and I could hardly contain my joy. But then came the day, and everything turned upside down when Sarah, my longtime friend, the one I thought would be there by my side, arrived with her squawking 1-year-old in tow. I could hardly believe my eyes. As I wrapped my arms around her for a hug, I noticed the baby, a tiny creature with bright eyes and a loud wail, clinging to her. "Hey, I couldn't find a babysitter last minute," she said with an apologetic smile. I'd always been supportive of my friends and their parenting struggles, but there was a time and a place, this wasn't it. As the evening wore on, the baby cried incessantly, punctuating the lively music with screams that made small talk nearly impossible. I felt my heart sinking. My friends were dodging the noise, trying their best to focus on conversations, but I could see the cliques breaking apart, the laughter dwindling. It was devastating to watch something that I'd meticulously crafted slowly deteriorate into chaos. I'd waited so long for a night of celebration, and now, all I could think about was how to salvage the joy. After a while, I found Sarah alone in the kitchen, the baby resting uncharacteristically quiet in her arms. I could see it in her eyes, she was tired, and I knew the stress of this situation weighed heavily on her. But I thought about all my friends gathered in my living room, their faces strained in an effort to connect amid the wreckage of the birthday festivities. So, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Sarah," I started, my voice low and shaky, "I really appreciate you coming, but it's tough for everyone with the baby here. Do you think you could?" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. I saw thoughts racing across Sarah's face, hurt, understanding, and then a kind of acceptance tinged with sorrow. "You want me to leave?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's my birthday, and I just wanted a fun night with everyone," I replied, my heart aching. In that moment, I felt like the villain of my own story. Asking her to leave felt selfish, but staying meant sacrificing my happiness, and potentially everyone else's. With a sad smile, she nodded, understanding the difficult position I was in. "I'll go." "I'm sorry," she murmured. As I watched her gather her things and slip away into the night, I felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief washed over me, mixed with guilt that left a heavy stone sitting in my gut. I couldn't believe I'd asked a friend to leave, but the party resumed after her exit. The music felt lighter, the laughter returned, but in the quiet moments, I kept reflecting on what had just happened. Was I truly the asshole for wanting a night free of distractions? I spent days questioning my choice and wondering if I'd made the right decision. It felt wrong to sacrifice the joy of my celebration for what felt like a moment of parental struggle. Eventually, I reached out to Sarah, uncertain and nervous, but I knew I needed closure. To my surprise, she responded with grace, assuring me that I wasn't a bad friend. She understood. We talked, and she shared the exhaustion and difficulty of being a new parent, how hard it was to navigate friendships that once felt easy. As we worked through the emotions, our bond deepened, and I realized that sometimes, in friendships, things get messy, and it's okay to feel conflicted. It didn't totally erase my guilt, but knowing she understood made it a little bit lighter. That birthday became a lesson wrapped in a celebration, the importance of communication, understanding, and the love that binds us, even when situations get messy. As the night wore on, the air around us thick with balloons and the scent of cake, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since the prior awkward moments. Laughter floated through the room like a warm blanket, reminding me of the joy we had all gathered to share. My friends were unwaveringly supportive, sipping their drinks and sharing stories, and it felt like the chaotic energy from earlier had melted into something more comfortable. Everyone had rallied to lift my spirits after that initial frustration, and in that moment, I began to feel celebratory again. But it didn't just stop there. My conversation with Sarah had opened my eyes to her world. I watched as she lovingly cradled her baby, who had finally quieted down, his little head resting against her shoulder. The sight brought a new wave of understanding. I had never completely grasped the challenges she faced as a new mother, the weight of responsibility mixed with exhaustion. As we spoke deeper into the night, she shared anecdotes from those first few months, the frightening sleepless nights, the endless worries, the whirlwind of love and confusion that came with a tiny human being entirely dependent on her. I found it fascinating, the way she navigated her life now so differently than before, and while my birthday was supposed to be about me, it had quickly become a channel for both of us to process our feelings, her about the struggles of new parenthood, me about feeling selfish for wanting the party to be a carefree escape. In those moments of raw honesty, I could sense our friendship evolve. It wasn't just me and Sarah from college trying to cling to the past. We were two adults carving out a new understanding of each other, moving forward even if our paths didn't look the same anymore. We laughed, cried, and even joked about how I could have set up a designated baby zone at my party, something I wouldn't have imagined saying just a few hours earlier. It felt refreshing to let go of the guilt that had been chasing me since that afternoon. I didn't know how to balance all these conflicting feelings, but talking it out with her made it feel less like a burden. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, and my friends began to trickle out with dollops of cake in hand, I felt a soft weight settle in my chest. It was a bittersweet mix of joy and melancholy. While the party was winding down, I also realized that this night had given birth to an unexpected clarity. I wrapped my arms around Sarah, and she melted into the hug like we'd done so many times before in our carefree youth. Instead of the usual light-hearted farewells, I whispered how grateful I was for her, and she echoed the sentiment. I could see it in her eyes. She was still the same friend I'd known, just now with layers, stories, and scars that I hadn't understood before. Later that night, after everyone had trickled away, I sat alone at the remnants of my birthday party, an untouched piece of cake still glaring at me from the table. I realized how this new chapter was more than just me getting older. It was about understanding that friendships ebb and flow with the seasons of life. We might not be able to hang out like we used to or do spontaneous fun things, but what we could do was find new bonds in the changes, in the complexities. It definitely wouldn't be smooth sailing, but after tonight, I felt excited to navigate it all together, kinks and all. This birthday, marked by its chaos, had gifted me the insight that sometimes what we need most is to listen, to empathize, and to embrace the messiness. Isn't that what growing up is about? As I fell asleep that night, visions of laughter and quiet conversations danced through my mind, weaving a tapestry that felt more profound than any single celebration could encapsulate. The days following the party carried a kind of buoyant energy, a strange mix of nostalgia and hope that wrapped around me like a favorite sweater. I found myself reaching out more frequently to Mia, now not just because of obligation, but out of genuine interest in her experiences as a new mom. Our conversations began to evolve. We'd swap horror stories about sleepless nights smeared with moments of joy that made the chaos feel almost poetic. I realized I'd never fully appreciated how much love and sheer determination went into being a parent until Mia shared her day-to-day reality, painting the mundane and the profound with the same brush. It was beautiful in its honest messiness, just like the night of my birthday. One rainy Thursday, As the sky poured like it was trying to wash the world clean, Mia stopped by for coffee. The heavy scent of freshly brewed espresso filled my small apartment as we nestled into the couch, her with her favorite throw blanket draped over her shoulders, me with a comfy sweatshirt and an eagerness that buzzed in the air around us. We laughed at an embarrassing story I shared about my awkward teenage years, and I could see her eyes light up as she ventured into her own past indignities. It felt like we were reclaiming some of the uncomplicated joys we'd shared before parenthood had stepped in to complicate things. But just when I thought the moment was blissfully drifting toward nostalgia, her phone erupted into a symphony of cries and vibrations. She looked apologetic as she fumbled for the device, and in that instant, it hit me just how much her life had changed. I could see the toll it took, the way her smile faltered for just a moment, like she was being pulled back into a world of responsibilities and sleepless nights. She answered the call, and I listened softly as the familiar sounds of a cooing baby interspersed with honking cars drifted from her phone. Often, I'd tried to imagine where our friendship would go, how the kids would be a part of it, or how midnight calls would intersect with a new reality. But in that instant, seeing her navigate motherhood while holding on to our friendship, it felt like we were carving a new path together, one where complexities were acknowledged but not allowed to choke the bond we had. Post-call, Mia looked exhausted but refreshed, a paradox I was getting used to witnessing. "Sorry, it was my mom. She's picking up dinner so I can actually enjoy a night off," she explained, her voice lightening. I teased her about how she wasn't taking me out for dinner, and she laughed openly, the hearty sound pouring warmth through the room. As the evening rolled on, we settled into a comforting rhythm of conversation that breathed life back into our friendship. There was an unspoken agreement to meet somewhere in the middle where kids and adult lives could merge without erasing who we once were. Our talks shifted between dreams for the future, both personal and professional, and sometimes we would pause, reflecting on the rather surprising detour our lives had taken. Each shared moment fortified our connection, and I found myself increasingly grateful for the present, for what we were building. Nights like these became the norm. A cozy dinner here, an impromptu playdate there, each hangout reinforced the idea that friendship was about adaptability. Mia's son came to frequent our get-togethers, and he'd inevitably end up stealing the show, his giggles filling the gaps of our sometimes serious adult conversations. While there were still moments of overwhelming chaos, and I admit, there were times when I found myself longing for those carefree days without baby talk and nap schedules, I often felt a new richness in the friendship that was slowly blossoming. As time passed, those tidbits of laughter echoed in my home, changing what I thought was needed to celebrate life's milestones. I came to embrace the idea that growth doesn't come from shying away from challenges but rather from embracing them fully. Each new layer added depth to our friendship, reminding me how still water runs deep. There was a moment, weeks after the party and our newfound understanding, when I had a creeping thought of guilt rise back up. Had it all been worth it? The struggles felt real and convoluted. But on a sunny afternoon with a gentle breeze wafting through my windows, as Mia's son giggled and reached for a crayon, painting the world with bright strokes, I felt an overwhelming wash of certainty. I was so glad I'd navigated this journey with her. Friendships may bend, but they don't break, they just find new shapes, new stories to tell. As I looked at Mia, her laughter and genuine happiness spilling over, I realized I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be questioning if I was the asshole for not reminding my fiancé that stoves are hot, but here we are. It was one of those typical Sunday afternoons, the kind where the sun spills in through the kitchen window, taunting me with warmth while I stood at the cluttered counter, trying to whip up something decent for dinner. I was juggling ingredients and listening to my fiancé, Tom, talk about his day, his voice fading in and out as I focused on slicing vegetables. Tom is the kind of guy who's enticed by a good recipe, except that he hasn't quite grasped the unspoken rules of culinary safety, specifically when it comes to the stove. It might sound petty, but I really thought he was old enough to know better. We've lived together for almost 3 years, and I've certainly burned myself enough times to have learned to be careful. I could feel the heat wafting from the burners, and as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw Tom standing too close to the stove, engrossed in a video on his phone about some gaming news. I remember thinking, he knows stoves are hot. My heart sank when I heard a sudden hiss, the sound of bacon grease meeting an exposed burner. In a split second, he pulled his hand back from the hot pan, yelping as he danced back like a toddler who just discovered a sea of lava. The moment felt like it unfolded in slow motion, the shock on his face, the way he shook his hand in disbelief, and the acrid smell of scorched skin starting to mingle with the savory aroma of dinner. I rushed over, my heart racing, both embarrassment and guilt seeping through me as I skated between irritation and concern. I mean, I knew I should have said something, right? But part of me thought he'd get it by now. Later that night, while I was dabbing ointment on his blistered skin, I tried to tease it away, saying something like, "You know, I did think about reminding you." Tom laughed, but it was that half-hearted kind of laugh, the one that told me he wasn't really finding it funny. "Maybe next time, you could actually remind me," he shot back, a playful spark in his eyes, but the undercurrent of annoyance was unmistakable. I grumbled something about how I didn't want to treat him like a kid who needed constant supervision, but deep down, I felt that creeping sense of guilt. Was I supposed to remind him about everything? A part of me wanted him to figure it out, to learn through his own mistakes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I had failed him somehow. Getting into bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, the shadows whispering my doubts back to me. Am I the asshole for letting him learn this lesson the hard way, or should I have recognized the potential for disaster before it even happened? The thoughts spiraled in my head. I felt exhausted. Should I have coddled him, or does that just breed dependency? Days turned into weeks, and while Tom's burn healed, the tension felt unresolved. I would catch him stealing glances at the stove, then avoiding it like it was the plague. I could see he was frustrated with himself, and sometimes I wondered if I needed to provide that level of reassurance he sought. Maybe it was the kids' show we just binge-watched, but there was something unsettling about waiting for him to catch fire literally or figuratively. Eventually, I brought it up during a quiet lunch date. "You know, I didn't mean to imply I wouldn't remind you. I just thought you'd know on your own." I barely recognized the nervousness creeping into my own voice. Tom looked at me, his brow furrowed like he was struggling to figure something out. I guess I thought that too, but I still end up doing dumb stuff. It's like walking into a wall when you're distracted. His vulnerability caught me by surprise. We ended up sharing a laugh, easing the tension between us as we agreed maybe a reminder every now and then wouldn't hurt. It wasn't about being infantilized, but more about nurturing each other as we learned together. That felt like a step toward a stronger partnership, and as we cleaned up those last few moments together, I realized it wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about how we navigated through those moments as one. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, but we had each owned our share of the lesson, and in the end, we grew a little closer because of it. As I washed the last pot, the warmth of those shared moments lingered in the air like the scent of garlic and thyme we'd used in our dinner. The lessons from the evening, those little nudges toward a deeper understanding, felt more sacred than the burned skin that would heal in time. I glanced over at Alex, carefully drying the plates, his brow furrowed in concentration. I recalled the tension from earlier, the thick silence that had filled our small kitchen when I could see the anger flash in his eyes after he accidentally brushed against the stove. I had been brushing my own hands against my apron, fully aware of the burn risk and completely unprepared for the sudden frustration that erupted between us. "Why didn't you say anything?" he had snapped, his voice sharp and raw, filled with that mix of hurt and defensiveness that only surfaces when you feel vulnerable. I winced at the memory, the way his words had cut through the air, as much of a burn as the one on his wrist. But here we were now, laughter creeping back as we joked about the overly ambitious meal I'd tried to prepare. "Next time, we just order pizza," I smirked, nudging his side playfully with my hip, and the tension melted a bit more. Because the truth was, I had worried about reminding him of the obvious. I had felt like a schoolteacher, a role neither of us wanted to slip into. I breathed in deeply, letting the scent of the soap and water soothe away the earlier unease. With every dish placed in its rightful cabinet, I was reminded that love isn't just about the beautiful moments, it's also about navigating the bumps and bruises together. That kind of partnership required a blend of trust and patience, where we could admit our faults without fear of being judged as incompetent. When he turned to me and offered a slight smile, I felt a pang of gratitude wash over me. "You know," he said softly, "I appreciate you. I don't always think about the obvious stuff, and sometimes I might even think I'm above reminders." I nodded, the words hanging between us like a delicate thread, as we stood in our imperfect kitchen doing our best to create a life together. "I'm here to remind you, but I won't make it a habit to be your alarm," I teased, and we both chuckled, relief flooding back in as I felt the weight of the day lift ever so slightly. I knew we'd have our share of misunderstandings, but maybe there was beauty in that chaos too. Would I be the perfect partner? Not a chance. But would I be there, paddling alongside him as we both tried to find our balance? Absolutely. And as we finally finished up, I glanced at the stove, still off, thankfully, and wondered how many more lessons waited for us in the future. It felt oddly comforting, This path we were carving out, uncertain yet ours. Maybe I did have some faults, but those didn't define our journey together, they merely added depth to it, guiding us toward the next meal, metaphorically and literally. That evening lingered in the air, a strange mix of tension and relief, both of us grappling with the warmth of the kitchen that had witnessed our little storm. As I washed the last dish, bubbles rising and popping in the soapy water, I felt Jacob's presence just behind me, his breath steady and comforting. "I'm really sorry about earlier," he said, his voice softer than I had heard in a while. "I hate that it escalated like that." I turned, meeting his gaze, and saw a flicker of vulnerability there. "I get it, we're both learning," I replied, trying to convey that I understood it wasn't just him. He offered a half smile, and something about it reminded me of all the shared moments we'd had, not just the disagreements. The late-night ice cream runs, the spontaneous kitchen dance parties, and even the marathon binge-watching sessions that sometimes turned into long conversations about our dreams. "I guess we're still growing together," he murmured, and his words set off a sweet flood of recognition in me. It was so easy to focus on the stormy parts of our relationship, but here we were, carving out our space to be imperfect together. I wiped my hands dry and took a moment to really look at him, the way his brow furrowed in thought, the way he absently tucked a loose curl behind his ear. "And we can remind each other about the hot stove, right?" I teased lightly, trying to bring back the levity we both needed. He laughed, a genuine, bright laugh that still echoed in the corners of the room, and I felt the tension fade a little more. "Deal. Just promise you'll remind me about the knives too, I'm the one always cutting myself," he joked back, and it felt like we had just forged an unspoken pact. We began packing away the leftover ingredients, and as I handed him a container, our fingers brushed, igniting an electric sweetness that sent a shiver down my spine. Moments like these felt more nourishing than the food we were preparing. I think it was in our shared laughter, our playful nudges against each other, and the small, everyday acknowledgments where quiet love really resided. Later, as we settled onto the couch, plates of dinner resting on our laps, I could hear the comforting hum of the world outside. The window was slightly ajar, letting in the cool evening breeze, and I felt alive in that moment, aware of how easily things could slip back into chaos. "What if we make a habit out of cooking together? Like a weekly thing?" I proposed, and Jacob pondered. "Yeah, that sounds great. But we should probably write down a safety checklist first," he joked again, his playful approach making it easier to imagine our future kitchen escapades. So, we started mapping out our weeks over dinner, Tuesday taco nights, Friday pizza parties. It felt like a plan to fortify ourselves against future mishaps. All the while, I noticed the way his excitement bubbled through, and I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come in just that one day. As we leaned over the table, tracing a layout of ingredients and ideas, I was struck by a thought. Life would never stop throwing challenges our way, but maybe, just maybe, those very challenges were what would draw us closer. And so, as we settled into the couch's plush embrace, my heart brimmed with hope. Lessons would come, and sometimes they might burn, just like that stove. But I knew we'd learn to navigate it together, to build our little fortress of understanding and compassion, one dish at a time. The beauty of partnership is not about being flawless, it's about embracing our imperfections and finding joy in the space between. I never thought I would find myself in a situation where I'd have to question my friendship with Jenna, but here we are. It all started innocently enough. We met in college, two awkward freshmen navigating the maze of dorm life together. Our friendship flourished as we shared late-night study sessions fueled by pizza and too many energy drinks, laughably bonding over our failed attempts at dating. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. I started throwing small get-togethers, just 8 or 10 of us, mostly to celebrate milestones like birthdays or just the fact that it was Friday. But there was something about Jenna's attendance at these parties that began to weigh on my mind. She would show up, of course, always dressed to the nines, charming the other guests with her vivacious energy. But as the night wore on, there was a familiar script. She'd monopolize conversations, drifting from one group to another, leaving a wake of uneasy tension. I'd try to steer her away from making crass jokes about our friends, and more than once, I found myself making half-hearted excuses to distance myself from her antics. It reached a point where I dreaded sending out those invites, knowing that Jenna would show up and overshadow everything with her loud laughter, often aimed at jabs that didn't sit well with anyone. One evening, after another party where I spent too much time apologizing for her behavior, I finally broke down. I texted her, a decision that felt monumental, a mix of fear and relief swirling in my stomach. "Hey, I think I need to take a step back from inviting you to parties. It's just hard to manage things when you're there. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing as I waited for her response. The three bubbles floated for what felt like an eternity before her message came back, sharp and cold. Wow. I can't believe you'd say that. I felt this strange mixture of guilt and empowerment flood through me. Was I the asshole for wanting to reclaim my space, my friendships, my peace of mind? The days that followed were awkward. I avoided larger friend groups fearing that the conversation would come back to Jenna, and I tiptoed around mutual friends who seemed torn between us. Jenna didn't reach out. It felt like I'd taken a match to a bridge I didn't want to burn but had no choice in doing so. But then, one night, I received a simple text from a mutual friend. She was wondering if I wanted to grab coffee. I hesitated at first, but curiosity won me over. Over steaming mugs, she shared Jenna's side. Apparently, Jenna felt isolated and hurt, convinced that everyone loved her except me. I hadn't noticed she'd been going through some personal stuff, and all the over-the-top antics had been an attempt to mask her vulnerability. I felt a pang of regret, mixed with the thought that maybe I hadn't handled the situation in the best way. I reached out to Jenna, just an olive branch of sorts, keeping it light, suggesting we go out for drinks and talk. The conversation was awkward, yet as we spoke, I realized we both had missed the mark with each other. I shared my perspective, and she showed me hers. Looking back, I'm still not sure if I was entirely in the right or if I was actually being an asshole. I learned that sometimes friendships require deeper conversations and understanding instead of ultimatums. We've been trying to rebuild a foundation, one conversation at a time, hopefully forging a new path forward with a little more grace and a lot more empathy. I remember the first time we truly sat down to talk, the clink of ice in our glasses echoing in the small booth wedged against the back wall of that bar. It felt almost surreal, like characters in a movie on the brink of reconciliation. I could sense the tension weaving between us, a taut string just waiting to snap under the weight of our histories and miscommunications. She looked different in the dim bar light, her usually guarded expression softened by the flickering candle between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the emotional tug-of-war ahead. I just didn't see it coming, I said, hoping my words would take root in a space where we could finally meet in the middle. Every party I threw, you seemed withdrawn. I could feel my excitement dimming when I saw you on the edge of the crowd, not really engaging with anyone. She leaned back, visibly grappling with my words. Well, you never asked me how I felt about it, did you? Her voice had that familiar, soft edge of vulnerability that I'd come to recognize, a hint of frustration layered within. It felt like you were trying to appease the group, and I was just part of the decoration. I frowned at her choice of word, decoration. Without thinking, I blurted, I didn't mean to treat you like an accessory. I noticed a flicker of hurt flash across her face, and I quickly backtracked. I just thought we were going through the motions together. I wanted to share good times, she sighed deeply, fingers tracing the condensation pooling on her glass. I see that now. But sometimes, it felt like you were more interested in being the host than being my friend, like you needed a perfect party, and I was just an extra. Those words hit hard. I wanted to argue, to insist that my intentions had been true, but I paused, allowing her feelings to seep in. It dawned on me that maybe I had been so focused on creating the perfect social atmosphere that I'd lost sight of what really mattered, connection. The conversation rolled into the night, bouncing between minor grievances and heartfelt sentiments, the awkwardness gradually giving way to genuine understanding. I learned how she viewed our friendship, the highs and lows she felt in the backdrop of my social life. Between laughter and serious revelations, there was a palpable sense of repair in the air. It wasn't perfect, there were still silences that hung like clouds, full of unsaid things, and sometimes the guilt would eat away at me when I thought of those evenings where her laughter felt distant. Yet, as the hours passed, I felt something shift. We weren't where we had been before, but maybe we didn't have to be. The next few months were a delicate dance of rebuilding, peppered with coffee dates and book exchanges instead of parties. Our conversations deepened, touching not just on the light topics but on dreams, failures, and everything in between. I remember one late afternoon, sitting in a cafe where the sunlight danced on the floor like an old friend, she confessed she struggled with vulnerability. I matched her honesty by admitting that I had a habit of ghosting the deeper emotions, preferring to sidestep anything that felt too heavy or complicated. It was in those moments of shared truth that I started to see that my approach could be problematic, stunted. No more half-hearted invites to gatherings and overlooking how her absence echoed in my life. I committed to including her, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to nurture our relationship. Still, I couldn't shake that lingering question from our first talk. Was I the asshole for needing to set boundaries, or was it my fault for not recognizing the friendship was fraying? Perhaps it was a bit of both, a complex tapestry woven with missteps and misunderstandings. Ultimately, it was clear that the journey to mend our friendship was more about understanding than assigning blame. And while I didn't know where we might end up, the path forward felt much clearer each time we shared a moment together, each new memory a building block towards something stronger. So here we are, navigating this space with more grace and empathy, discovering that perhaps the true test of friendship isn't in our moments of success but the nuances of our failures, learning to forgive not just each other but ourselves, one conversation at a time. One of those pivotal moments came just a week later, after an unexpectedly rainy Saturday kept me cooped up at home. I had just settled onto my couch, a pile of takeout boxes littering the coffee table, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jess. "Want to take a walk? I have something to talk about." My stomach flipped. I didn't want to overanalyze the invitation, but instinctively I knew that this wasn't just about a stroll in our favorite park. I felt both apprehension and a tingling sense of hope as I replied with a simple, "Sure. Just give me a few." As we walked side by side, the clouds hanging low above us, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and new beginnings, Jess broke the silence first. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I realized I've been so focused on feeling excluded that I didn't see how my actions contributed to the mess we found ourselves in." The sincerity in her voice pierced through the tension that had lingered between us since our last heart-to-heart. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a weight lift just from her honesty. Yeah, and for me, it was about feeling unheard, like my frustrations didn't matter. It wasn't about the parties, but about feeling like my feelings were being brushed off. I guess I was tired of making excuses for why I needed boundaries. The words spilled from me, as if I was finally allowing myself to breathe and let the air of vulnerability flow freely between us. "I never wanted you to feel left out, but it feels like every time I extended an invitation, you were going through your own thing. I didn't know how to reach you." Jess nodded solemnly, her brow furrowing in thought. "I see that now. I was dealing with my own issues, stress at work, family stuff, but I didn't realize I was shutting you out. I thought I was protecting myself, you know?" There was a pause as we stopped beneath the swaying branches of an old oak tree. The wind rustled its leaves, mirroring the turbulence of our unresolved emotions. "I missed you, I really did," she continued, her voice softer now, more delicate, like the moment itself. "I guess I just didn't know how to reach out without feeling ashamed." I took a deep breath, feeling the sincerity of her words wrapping around my heart like a hug. "We're in this together, Jess. I don't want you to feel ashamed of needing space. But we have to communicate, stop dancing around issues. We owe each other the honesty, even when it feels uncomfortable." Armed with a new mutual understanding, we began to talk more openly about our expectations. Sure, there were discussions about plans, but also about our emotional landscapes, our worries, and dreams. We started meeting not just during events in the community but for the little things, coffee on lazy Sundays, movie nights where we'd laugh over outdated films, moments that glimmered brighter than any party we had ever hosted. The rebuilding wasn't smooth, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. Sometimes we'd slip back into old habits, forgetting to check in with each other. But with each misstep, each awkward text or accidental silence, we would remind ourselves that growth isn't a straight line. It's more of a sprawling web of mistakes and little triumphs, golden threads weaving us tighter. Months passed, and while our friendship wasn't wholly restored, it felt reborn, like a flower stubbornly blooming through asphalt, resilient and beautiful. I realized that it was okay not to have all the answers, to not put an official label on our bond just yet. What mattered was the journey we navigated together, filled with more understanding. And even in silence, we were learning to be okay. One day, at a small gathering at another friend's house, I caught Jess's eye across the crowded room. She raised her glass, a smile blooming on her face. That simple gesture felt monumental, like we had said so much without uttering a single word. Looking back now, I think about the precarious balance of friendships and how vulnerability, when shared, can create something beautiful from chaos. Sometimes, all it takes to mend a frayed connection is acknowledging our imperfections and extending the grace to learn together. And as I stand on this winding path, uncertain of where it leads, I feel a new sense of resilience alongside Jess, a promise that we would continue to navigate the hard conversations, weaving our laughter and heartaches into the intricate tapestry of our friendship one day at a time. I still remember the moment everything changed, the day I sat on my bed, scrolling through Instagram, when my mom knocked on my door. The look on her face told me this wasn't going to be a simple chat about dinner or my plans for the weekend. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice smaller than I remembered. Instinctively, I felt my heart sink, and I gestured for her to sit beside me. I had no idea that the next few minutes would thrust me into a moral quandary that would shake my already wavering sense of loyalty to my family. Mom had been trying to hide her debt problem for a while, and though I suspected something was off as I watched her tense up during calls with bill collectors, it was still a jolt to hear her say it aloud, "I can't keep up with the payments anymore." Suddenly, my hard-earned college fund, something I had been saving for years, became the focal point of our conversation. "I need your help," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I felt a rush of love and a twinge of resentment. Honestly, it felt like I was being pulled into a whirlpool of guilt. I was just starting to map out my future, a future that I'd worked so hard for, fueled by the long hours at my part-time job and the sacrifices I made to save every penny. "Mom, my college fund is for my education," I stammered, trying to regain my composure. "It's not like I can just give it away." The room was thick with silence, and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. It felt like a betrayal not just of my own dreams but of my own commitment to my future. I watched her face collapse, the mask of strength crumbling away to reveal the panic and desperation of a single parent. I admired her for standing up for us when things got tough, but I couldn't ignore that gnawing anxiety in my chest. Anxiety mixed with anger. Why didn't she reach out for help sooner? Doesn't a parent owe it to their kid to maintain stability for them? I didn't want to be selfish, but how could I compromise everything I wanted for what felt like a cycle of financial instability? I found myself replaying the moment over and over in my head, and each time, I felt that tug of war between love for my mom and my goals for myself. With time, I ultimately decided to turn her down. "I'm sorry, but I just can't do that," I said softly, shaking my head. The disappointment in her eyes left a cavern of regret in my stomach. The next few weeks felt heavy as silence filled our house, each day a reminder of my choice, a choice that felt a bit like tearing the fabric of our relationship. I immersed myself in my studies, trying to escape the tension, but those moments, her hopeful glance when I mentioned potential scholarships or her wistful comments about my college dreams, pierced through my efforts to keep both our worlds separate. As the months went by, our interactions became strained. Dad, who was more of a distant memory than a frequent presence, made things even murkier. He called one evening to check on us and inadvertently added fuel to the fire. "Your mother is just being stubborn," he said gruffly, dismissing her concerns. That small comment unleashed a tide of rage within me, forcing me to confront the reality that this wasn't just about money, it was about a family struggling to hold together the fragments of a life that hadn't turned out the way we all hoped. I started questioning everything, my choices, my future, even my feelings toward my mom. Was I the selfish kid who turned her back in a time of need? Or was I justified in protecting my dreams? Months later, around the time of my acceptance letters, I found myself seated at the kitchen table across from her, a stack of unopened envelopes piled between us. I got in, my voice was flat, lacking the excitement I should have felt. Instead of celebrating, we sat there as if burdened by unspoken words. Rather than the jubilant moment I imagined, it became a reminder of all that lay between us. "What are you going to do?" she asked, but it was more of a whisper, her vulnerability mirrored by her expression. I had an idea, a small flicker of hope amidst this despair, but I hesitated. "I want to go," I finally confessed, "but maybe I could help you with some of the bills. Just a little." For the first time, I saw a glimmer of pride in her eyes, mixed with the weariness of a mother who had already given so much. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it certainly didn't fix everything, but it was a start, a bridge on the shaky ground between us. I may have refused to give up my college fund, but in that moment, I chose to stand by her in a different way. I think, ultimately, we are all a mix of selfishness and selflessness, navigating the complexities of family and responsibility. I still don't know if I was the asshole or if I made the right choice, but I hold on to the belief that love, in its strangest forms, can sometimes redefine our paths in life. As I sit here now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realize that this story isn't just about money or a college fund. It's about understanding that sometimes, saying no doesn't mean you don't care, it means you're trying to find a way to care for each other, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. I remember the day it happened as if it were yesterday. My phone buzzed incessantly, that annoying ringtone piercing the stillness of my afternoon. I picked it up, expecting a text from my best friend about a new series we'd been binging, but it was my mom. Just a few words at first. Can we talk? Important. My stomach sank. Mom rarely asked to talk like that unless it was about something serious. I thought about the countless times I had mentally prepared myself to take on heavier burdens, but what she had to say caught me off guard. Sitting at my desk, surrounded by textbooks and half-finished assignments, I felt that familiar knot forming in my chest. When I called her back, her voice trembled. "I've been trying to figure things out with the bills, honey," she started, hesitating as if the words were hard to muster. I sensed where this was going, yet a part of me clung to hope. Maybe she just needed a little guidance, or there was a new job opportunity. But no, it was worse. She laid it all out, the debts, the missed payments, looming financial crises. I caught my breath at her mention of your college fund as though it were a mere line item on a spreadsheet, not the foundation of my future. I'd spent years planning, dreaming, hoping to leverage that tiny fund into something bigger. My heart raced with a mix of fear and anger, a swirling storm of emotions. Her voice softened as she continued, "I know it's a lot to ask, but I really need your help." I could almost visualize her, sitting in the dim light of our cramped living room, looking smaller than I remembered, trapped in a relentless cycle of regret. As guilt washed over me, I wanted to scream that she had promised me a better future, one she had dreamed for both of us. Yet the thought of abandonment also loomed large in my mind. After all, she had sacrificed so much for me. I couldn't just turn my back on her, but the thought of handing over my hard-working college savings twisted at my insides. Days passed, but the conversation lingered like an uninvited guest. I spoke to friends, tried to convince myself what the right choice was, but their well-meaning advice didn't help. "You're not an asshole for wanting a future for yourself," they'd say. Still, their words felt distant, hollow almost. I spent restless nights tossing and turning, images of my mother's face mixing with visions of my college dreams. I didn't want to be the villain in this story, nor did I want to sacrifice my aspirations to become a martyr. The night before our final conversation loomed over me, heavy and suffocating. I knew I couldn't keep swaying in indecision forever, the fear of making the wrong choice gnawed at me. That evening, I approached her, feeling dread ripple through my body. "I can't give up my college fund, Mom. It's my future, my chance to break away from everything we've been through." Her eyes, those deep wells of emotion, held disbelief tinged with hurt, but I saw a glimpse of understanding there too. Perhaps she recognized the struggle in my heart, the battle of wanting to support her while needing to build my life. After a silence that felt like an eternity, she finally nodded. "I see. It's your choice to make, and I don't want to take that from you." I watched her retreat into her thoughts, the weight of this decision settling heavily between us, both of us unsure of how to navigate the aftermath. As I reflect now, unsure if I did the right thing, the sunset seems to echo my internal struggle, the radiant colors a reminder that endings can also be beautiful beginnings. I can't say if I'll ever shake that sense of guilt, wondering if love and sacrifice can ever truly coexist without tearing one apart. A few months later, after diligently working part-time and focusing on my classes, I noticed a change in my mother. Instead of spending sleepless nights worrying over debts, she started taking control, searching for new jobs, attending workshops, connecting with others who could elevate her career. It was slow, but I could see hope creeping back into her life. In moments of doubt, I found myself revisiting that conversation, how it unfolded and morphed into something unforeseen. I learned that even in moments laden with tension, there is a possibility for growth, for both my mother and me. Realizing that love manifests differently for each of us gives me solace. What we desire can shift, turn, and evolve, just as we do. So no, I may never stop wondering if perhaps I was the asshole back then, but I'm slowly starting to understand that sometimes aligning our hearts means making the hardest calls, with hands trembling and voices faltering, but never without love. In the weeks that followed my decision, life felt strangely muted. The air in our home thickened with unspoken words and unshed tears, a heavy blanket that wrapped around us as we tried to navigate this new, uncertain space. I kept my distance, mostly retreating to the small room I'd claimed as my sanctuary, where posters of my favorite bands clashed with textbooks filled with dreams I still held tightly. Each night, I would lay there, staring at the ceiling, running my fingers over the hard spine of my college fund savings account, my heart as heavy as it was when I turned my mother down. One evening, she knocked on my door. It was tentative, almost as if she were afraid to disrupt the fragile silence that had fallen between us. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I wanted to re-enter the conversation. But knowing that we couldn't just let the air sit stagnant, I nodded, pushing the door open wider. She stepped inside, her face drawn and weary, the weight of her financial burdens etched across her brow. "Can we talk?" she said, perching on the edge of my desk, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I could see the flicker of hurt in her eyes, the remnants of our last conversation still haunting her. "I've been thinking about what you said." Her voice trailed off as she glanced around my room, her gaze landing on the faded photographs of happier times, memories that felt almost foreign now. I waited, my heart racing, unsure if I was ready to hear her feelings, or if I even wanted to relive that emotional chaos. It felt as though we were balancing on the precipice. One slip could send us tumbling down into anger or resentment. I don't want you to think that I blame you," she finally continued, the words spilling out like drops of rain in a sudden storm. "I was scared. Scared of losing the only thing that's been constant for me." I felt tears pricking my eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean to make things worse. I have to think about my future too. I know it's selfish but, no," she cut in firmly, a new kind of resolve sparking in her tone. "It's not selfish to want better for yourself. I realize that now. I've been struggling for so long, and I projected it all onto you. I shouldn't have. It's my debt, my choices. And while I would give anything to have my own college fund, I realize now that I can't force you to carry the burden of my mistakes. You deserve to have your path, and I need to find my way through this without dragging you down." The raw honesty in her words washed over me like a bomb. I hadn't expected this, didn't anticipate that our roles might shift in this way. I hadn't realized she hadn't seen me as just her child, but as a vessel to salvage her dreams. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, letting the weight of our conversation settle between us like a fragile truce. I saw her vulnerability, but I also recognized my own fear mirrored back at me, the fear of failing to live up to the dreams we both held. "Maybe we both need to start over," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "We can face this together, but not on my shoulders alone. You have to let me pursue what I want." A flicker of hope lit her eyes, and in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't just about the money, it was about rebuilding trust, redefining love, and understanding what it meant to stand together while acknowledging the burden each of us had been carrying. It was about recognizing that love can be fierce and protective but also gentle enough to create space for both of us to breathe. Gradually, our conversations began to change, morphing into something more profound than we'd imagined. We talked about her debts honestly, about the job she was thinking of pursuing, about how budgeting wasn't just a punishment but a chance for rebirth. I shared my aspirations too, the things I wanted to study, and the dreams I held tightly inside. With every word, we moved closer back to each other, each moment stitching up the frayed edges of our relationship. As I write this, months later, I can finally acknowledge that I never stopped wondering if I was the asshole. Perhaps I was at one point, but I was also a daughter trying to carve out her own life amid chaos. And isn't that what love asks of us? To hold both our dreams and our loved ones' dreams in the balance, even when it threatens to tear us apart? I still don't have all the answers, but every day feels like a chance to learn, to grow. I'm working on my future while watching my mother fight for hers, an unexpected team navigating the complexities of life with newfound respect. Sometimes, saying no opens the gateway to saying yes, to ourselves, and to the hope of brighter tomorrows. I've always loved being the fun aunt, the one who brought the best gifts and made the best jokes, but when my sister and her husband had kids, twins, no less, it felt like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, I was supposed to shower them with unconditional love, praise, and endless affection, but all I could feel was this nagging sense of disconnect. It's not that I didn't want to love them, I just couldn't seem to connect with them the way everyone expected. I remember visiting them a few days after they came home from the hospital. There were balloons and flowers everywhere, and my sister had that glow about her that only new parents get. The little ones lay sleeping in their cribs, swaddled tightly, and I felt this profound sense of anxiety wash over me. As I sat there, pretending to coo and fuss over them, all I could think was about how quiet it was, how distant it felt, like watching a movie through a foggy lens. I can't quite pinpoint when I started feeling this way. I think it was a few months in, during family gatherings when I noticed the way everyone else looked at the twins, as if they were the center of the universe. I'd smile and play along, help change diapers and keep an eye on them when my sister needed a break, but every time they'd giggle at their parents' silly faces or reach for their hands, a part of me would turn cold. I started to dread all the family outings, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in my sister's new life. She'd look at me with those big expectant eyes, as if waiting for me to beam with pride or joy, but all I could manage was a thin smile while my chest tightened with guilt. Was this normal? I wondered if I was a bad person for not feeling that immediate rush of love everyone keeps talking about. One evening during dinner, the twins let out their loud, high-pitched cries, genuine, baby-like wails that tore through the happy chatter. Everyone jumped to their feet like they were hitting a pause button in a sitcom, and there I was, stuck at the table, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering why no one ever seemed to notice the way I felt. That night, I confided in my close friend, who suggested maybe I was just overwhelmed or needed time. "It's okay," she said, "not everyone falls in love immediately with babies." But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't a phase. What if I was just not cut out to be around them? As weeks turned into months, and I continued showing up for family dinners, my heart ached because I cared about my sister, her husband, and the kids in a way that felt different from what was expected of me. When my sister called me one night, so excited about their upcoming first birthday party and insisting that I prepare a special speech as the crazy aunt, I felt the weight of my silence grow heavier. I choked out some sort of muted excitement, but inside I was torn. Could I really stand in front of everyone, professing feelings that didn't live in my heart? Would they see me as the villain in this story? The climax of my internal struggle came that day at the birthday party. There were decorations everywhere, laughter filling the air, and a cacophony of joyful chaos swirling around me. As I smiled at the little darlings, I couldn't shake the feeling of just being an outsider in my own family. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood there, looking at those tiny faces with their cake-covered smiles. "I love you guys. I really do," I finally managed, the words feeling foreign yet necessary. And in that moment, I decided to lean into the love I could muster, imperfect and uncertain as it was. It didn't have to look like my sister's love, it just had to be mine. Walking away that evening, I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. I hadn't solved the problem, but maybe I didn't need to be the perfect aunt. I was learning that love can take many shapes, even ones that feel unsure. As for my sister? Well, she hasn't brought it up, but I think she knows. Maybe she could see the struggle reflected in my eyes, or maybe, deep down, she just wants me there, flaws and all. I guess time will tell if things will ever change between us. For now, I'm just trying to accept this complicated journey of love and connection, one awkward family dinner at a time. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sounds of laughter and playful squeals wafted in from the living room, where my sister's kids were ramping up for another round of their favorite game. I looked at the scattered remnants of dinner, spaghetti sauce splattered across plates, a half-eaten loaf of garlic bread, and felt that familiar churn in my stomach. It wasn't the food, I've always had a knack for cooking. No, it was the noise of joy reminding me of the gulf that seemed to yawn wider every time I sat in the midst of it. My sister, Marissa, was in her element, laughing as she tried to referee the chaos, a mixture of amusement and exasperation lighting up her eyes. I couldn't help but admire her, the way she navigated the madness with grace, her love bursting at the seams and spilling over into every corner of her home. And there I sat, a few steps back, fumbling to participate without truly understanding how to engage with the lives she was so passionately building. It made me feel like an imposter in my own family, awkward and not quite fitting the mold of the cool aunt I was supposed to be. Marissa had always been the one with the booming personality. She thrived in the company of others, drawing energy from their adoration, while I often found comfort in the quiet corners, away from the spotlight. It wasn't that I didn't care about her children, I just felt a disconnect, a frayed wire in an otherwise buzzing circuit. I've often tried to connect with Lucy and Ben, aged 6 and 8, in little steps. I'd bring them treats when I visited, and I'd ask them questions about their favorite toys or the movies they liked. I wanted to understand their world, but the effort felt clumsy at times. A few weeks ago, I showed up with a brand new box of colorful markers and a stack of blank paper, hoping we could unleash some creativity together. "Look what I brought," I announced, watching eager smiles bloom like flowers. But somehow, my enthusiasm felt out of sync with theirs. They preferred the swift thrill of video games to the slower process of creating, sending me tumbling back into my insecurities. Did I even know how to be an aunt? As I caught a glimpse of my sister's easy banter with the kids, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I was supposed to mirror her warmth. Maybe that was the essence of love in a family, this perfect, enveloping way of being that I struggled to emulate. It left me feeling inadequate, and in those moments, the tension would pull tight across my chest. Would they ever see me as someone who could be just as lovable, despite my hesitations? As I stared into my half-finished glass of Merlot, lost in my thoughts, I noticed Marissa glancing my way. She raised an eyebrow, and her expression shifted from amusement to something keenly perceptive, as if she could read the doubts swirling around in my mind. "Hey, wanna play with us?" Lucy's voice broke through the noise, her big eyes open wide with genuine hope. My heart fluttered, caught in the unexpected warmth of her invitation. Here was a chance to bridge the gap, to step into their world, even if it felt like a leap of faith. "I'm not very good at those games, sweetie," I replied with a hesitant smile, apologetic and self-aware. I saw a flicker of disappointment on her face, but then Ben chimed in, his enthusiasm infectious. "It doesn't matter. We'll teach you." The sheer sincerity in their voices made my heart twist in that bittersweet way. Maybe I could try. Maybe I didn't have to be perfect. In the end, I slowly made my way into the living room, resigning myself to the chaos that awaited me. The game was loud and frantic, full of the sort of competitive energy I usually avoided, one that filled me with anxiety instead of the thrill it sparked in others. I stumbled through the rules the kids shouted in tandem, mixing up characters and misinterpreting strategies, but amidst my blunders, laughter bubbled up and broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. There it was again, that feeling I often chased, the connection pulling us closer, however imperfect it was. As we played, I noticed Lucy and Ben sharing knowing glances, their laughter spilling over into my own smiles. I realized, then, that perhaps I didn't need to love them like their parents did. My love could be quieter, a whisperizing thread in their lives, invisible but strong. As the evening wound down, Marissa leaned in, her arm wrapping around my shoulder as the kids excitedly plotted their next gaming adventure. "You did good, sis. They love having you around," she said, her voice a mix of encouragement and sisterly confidence. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a flicker of understanding passing between us. It was a moment that made the earlier conversation about love and connections feel less daunting. Maybe love doesn't always scream, sometimes, it hums softly in shared spaces, even in silence. Sitting there surrounded by laughter and chaos, I dared to believe that love could grow in unexpected ways, holding imperfections at its center, and for the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened in content, like I belonged, flaws and all. As the evening wore on, I watched my sister interact with her kids, their laughter wrapping around us like a warm blanket. The way she knelt down to tie her youngest shoelaces, turning it into a game, her eldest giggling as they made silly faces at each other, I felt the edges of my heart begin to soften, the tension of my earlier doubts easing just a little. For so long, I had been an outsider in their world, fumbling through interactions with awkwardness, feeling like I was always one step behind in terms of affection. I sipped my drink, pretending to keep up with the adult conversations around me while stealing glances at my niece and nephew, watching them scramble for toys, their joy palpable. It was exhausting trying to figure out where I fit in, but with each chuckle that escaped their lips, I began to see pieces of myself reflected back at me, children thriving in their small universe of imagination. I leaned back in my chair and tried to enjoy the noise, the clattering of Legos on the floor and the hum of animated discussions about superheroes. "Hey, Auntie! Look at this." My niece suddenly popped up beside me, clutching a crumpled piece of paper covered in colorful scribbles. She was beaming, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I made this just for you." I took the paper from her hands, the vibrant colors swirling chaotically across the page. It was an abstract masterpiece, a jumble of shapes that could be anything from rainbows to monsters. I felt a surge of affection, not because I was suddenly head over heels for her or fulfilling a norm of being the doting aunt, but because I saw her. I saw how hard she had worked to create something for me, to share a piece of her world, and that was something to cherish. "Wow. I love it." I grinned wider than I had in weeks. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and in that instant, I knew this small exchange was a step forward, not a leap, but still something. I felt a stir of belonging that was heavy with imperfections. I looked over to my sister, and for a brief moment, our glances locked. Her smile was knowing, a shared acknowledgement of the work both of us were putting into our relationships. As the night progressed, I began to breathe a little easier, my laughter joining the cacophony of voices, allowing myself to be swept up in the nuances of family life. For several more hours, we huddled together around a mess of dinner plates, overflowed drinks, and overwhelmed conversations. When I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in ages. It was still going to be a long road. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would magically change overnight. But I found solace in understanding that I didn't need to love my sister's children the way she did, just my version of love, whatever that might look like, was perfectly valid. Perhaps love could be like this beautiful mess we'd created that night, a patchwork of doodles, varied textures, shades, and overlapping lines. Weeks turned into months, and as the holidays approached, I couldn't shake the sense of change that lingered in the air. I started offering to babysit occasionally, wanting to break through the barrier of unfamiliarity that had once made me feel like an outsider. I found myself emerging from my shell, directing silly puppet shows with mismatched socks, playing hide and seek in the corners of their home, and reading story after story until nap time was unavoidable. Each time I returned home, I would hang up my coat and find a small piece of my newfound warmth nestling in the pocket, a token of connection I didn't realize I was building. Looking back on that conversation with my sister, I realized how important it was for her too. She'd carved out space for me to be precisely who I was, without any expectations of perfection. It was in the little moments, the fleeting glances and shared laughter, that love unveiled itself in new forms. Perhaps we all could lean into our uncertainties, knowing that something beautiful could stem from the chaos, the imperfections, and the undying effort to bridge gaps, one family dinner, and one awkward exchange, at a time. I still think about that night occasionally, especially when I spy my niece decorating another crayon masterpiece, or my nephew zooming around with a superhero cape flapping in the wind. Love is like a starting point on a canvas, it unfolds endlessly, and I'm beginning to understand that being part of their world is just as special as creating my own path too. And in this ongoing journey, I'm learning to embrace the surprises and to keep the dialogue open, because maybe it's in the imperfections that we find the most authentic forms of connection. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, but here I am, staring at my new tattoo, not sure if I'm the hero or the villain of my own story. For the last 2 years, my boyfriend, Jake, and I had been living hand in hand, going through the ups and downs of life together in our tiny one-bedroom apartment. He's the kind of guy who dreams big, and I've always loved that about him. His ambition fuels my own. We talked about engagement frequently, and while I wasn't nagging him, I was starting to feel that itch for a ring that we had sort of agreed on. So, after almost a year of saving up, I had stashed away about $1,000, earmarked specifically for a beautiful engagement ring I had seen in a local shop. The plan was to keep saving until I had enough to take him out to dinner, drop down on one knee, and ask him to be my forever. But then, life happened. Just a few weeks ago, the itch for something permanent became too strong. I had always dreamed of getting a tattoo to commemorate a moment in my life, but never found the right time or design until a sudden burst of inspiration hit me. I wanted to capture a symbol of our journey together, something that could feel like both a celebration and a mark of our commitment. So, on a whim, I walked into a tattoo parlor and dropped that $1,000 on an intricate design of a compass, where we each planned to add our initials to signify that we were each other's direction. The moment the needle hit my skin, I felt exhilarated, a rush that pushed aside any guilt I might have felt. Yet, once the high faded, the guilt settled in heavy. I started envisioning Jake's face when he'd find out, and the thought gnawed at me for days. I could see the disappointment brewing in his eyes, could imagine the way his mouth would drop open slightly in disbelief. When I finally confessed after dinner one night, it didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. His expression went from confusion to frustration, and he snapped out of it with, "You spent our ring money? On a tattoo? Seriously?" It felt like a punch to the gut. As the words hung in the air, I tried to explain my thought process, how this felt like something I had needed for myself in that moment, but he just shook his head. "I just can't believe you chose a tattoo over the future we talked about." His tone was flat, and I felt every bit of anger and disappointment directed at me. I wanted to scream that it was more than just ink, it was a representation of everything we'd built together, but all he could see was the dollars and the broken promise. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with doubt. Part of me was excited about my tattoo, grateful for the way it reminded me of our love, but another part of me felt like I had just sabotaged the best thing I had ever had, the chance to build a life together with the person I adored. Days turned into a week, and the space between us began to feel like an echo of things left unsaid. I wanted to give him time to process, but I also felt the gnawing uncertainty. Had I ruined everything? Did I prioritize a fleeting moment over a lasting commitment? In the end, we had a long conversation a few days later, and Jake surprised me. He admitted he understood my need for self-expression and how significant it was for me, but he still felt cheated out of a moment that meant so much to him. In that moment, I promised him that I'd take on extra shifts to help us save up again for the ring. We both needed to blend our dreams together instead of letting diverging paths fracture the love we had. So, we're still together, still saving, just with a compass tattoo on my forearm and a shared resolve to navigate our way forward. Looking back, I hope I made the right choice, but I guess that's something we're both figuring out together. As I reflect on that moment, lying in bed with the weight of my decision still settling in my heart, I realize how fragile our dreams can feel. The tattoo, a simple compass, represents more than my desire for adventure and my love for the sea. It captures the essence of us, two people charting a course through life, not always aligned on every detail, but willing to navigate the waves together. The next few weeks were a mix of bittersweet emotions. I took on as many extra shifts as I could manage at the cafe, pouring coffee and exchanging pleasantries with customers while my mind often drifted back to the conversation I had with Matt, where he expressed his disappointment so genuinely. Each night, exhausted after long hours, I'd come home to find him nestled on the couch, usually with takeout containers cluttering the coffee table. His face would light up when I walked in, and I'd pretend those little moments, filled with warmth and kindness, were enough to erase the tension from before. One Saturday morning, as I served him pancakes topped with strawberries, I noticed the shadows under his eyes slowly fading. He seemed lighter, and I thought maybe the tattoo had struck a chord with him too. "You know," he said between bites, "it's not just about the ring, right? It's what it symbolizes for us." His gaze was steady, and I felt a rush of warmth realizing we were rebuilding our dreams, step by step. The conversation lingered with me, swirling in my mind through the afternoon as I painted my nails, gazing at the compass. I had adorned a symbol of our navigation, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of insecurity that nestled just beneath the surface. I started wondering if I'd ever really be able to save for that ring again. But as weeks turned into months, our shared compromise began to feel like a shared bond. We spoke about potential timelines, future plans, and the kind of life we wanted to build. None of that felt rushed, but rather infused with mutual respect. Matt confided one evening about his own dreams to travel, revealing a longing I hadn't fully seen before. "How about we save for a trip instead? Just you and me, on our own adventure," he said, an expectant grin spread across his face. There was something exhilarating about the idea, pulling us from societal expectations into a realm we could mold together. So, we changed trajectories again, setting aside the engagement ring talk for the moment, focusing instead on our travel fund. The tattoo became an anchor of sorts, reminding us to always return to our true north. It marked a chapter in our relationship, a beautiful reminder of the moment we chose communication over disappointment. Every time I glanced at it, that little compass invoked the promise of exploration, encouraging us to seek out new paths where dreams intertwined. Life moved forward like that, simple yet filled with the unexpected joys of our daily rhythms. Still, a part of me wrestled with the ghost of that elusive engagement ring, now a distant wish rather than an immediate goal. Was I selfish for prioritizing my desires over his expectations? I often questioned it, but then I'd see the look in Matt's eyes when we planned our travel itinerary, the spark of excitement that reminded me that we were figuring this out as we went. Eventually, we took our first trip together, the result of a few months of meticulous budgeting and shared late-night planning sessions that felt far more rewarding than simply swiping a card for impulse buys. As we trekked through the hills of a quaint little town filled with art and adventure, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment wash over me. We hiked to a viewpoint one evening, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I could see in Matt's gaze something deeper than our previous expectations. "You know," he whispered, "if we ever do get engaged, it'll be because we've made this journey together." I nodded, realizing that this path felt right, even if it was not the one I initially thought I was meant to take. The uncertainty still lingered, but it felt safe nestled beside his confidence in our partnership. Now, as I sit here recounting this experience, that small compass on my forearm feels less like a marker of a choice I made on a whim and more like a testament to the beauty of navigating life together. I hope we're making all the right choices, but even if we stumble along the way, I know we'll figure it out side by side. That promise alone is worth more than any ring ever could be. I can't help but smile whenever I catch a glimpse of that compass, its lines etched in ink, a little reminder of the journey we're on. It's funny how something that started as a spontaneous decision transformed into a symbol of our bond. Through countless conversations over takeout dinners and quiet evenings on our cramped couch, it became evident that this wasn't just about the ring or the tattoo, it was about us redefining what commitment truly meant. Sure, there were moments filled with tension. I could still see the flicker of disappointment in Daniel's eyes each time I pulled up my sleeve, revealing my new ink. It wasn't reluctance he felt, it was the shadow of expectations, the weight of what he had imagined for us. But then there were also shared smiles, laughter bubbling up over iced coffee as we scrolled through engagement ring designs online. We increasingly found ourselves dreaming instead about adventures, discussing places we wanted to explore, and traditions we wanted to create. There's something about pooling dreams together that made the prospect of marriage feel closer, more tangible. I even joked that maybe we could just stamp passports with our love story instead of just fingers adorned with gold. Daniel laughed, his brows raised. It was a silly notion, but it was mine, a glimpse into my heart reaching out to him. Weeks turned into months, and while I continued to take on extra shifts, we also began mapping out our game plan. What if we saved just a little more for a trip next summer? I proposed one evening as we spread out a world map on the floor, filled with pinned locations and scribbled notes. To my delight, he spotted a little island off the coast of Thailand, and he was enthralled. We could watch the sunrise from the beach, just us and the horizon, he said, eyes sparkling, and in that moment, I saw not just a vision but a promise, a different kind of engagement. But there were still doubts that crept in like unwelcome guests. What if we never made it to that ring? What if life took us down a path that wasn't supposed to include marriage? I often found myself oscillating between exhilaration for the adventure we were shaping and fear that, in the end, it wouldn't be enough. So, I shared these misgivings with Daniel one night. Sitting by our flickering living room lamp, I admitted how I feared being seen as the one who diverted our course, the root of any uncertainty that lay ahead. What if you wanted that ring more than anything, and I've messed it all up? The vulnerability of my confession hung in the air, settling deep within us both. He took my hand, his touch steady and reassuring. You didn't mess anything up. We're being real about what we want, and that's powerful. Sometimes it's okay to step outside the script we've been given and write our own. His words washed over me, soothing the anxiety that had coiled tightly in my chest. In many ways, that moment defined our relationship. It was about honoring each other's dreams without losing sight of our own. As time passed, that tattoo began to feel more like home to me, a compass pointing towards our aspirations, guiding us forward in harmony. Each time I felt lost or anxious, I'd glance at my forearm as if the compass were whispering that I was on the right path. And so we continued our journey, both separately chasing individual dreams and together weaving a shared tapestry of experiences we could cherish. Life was unpredictable, but we embraced it, aware that every twist and turn only deepened our connection. In the end, as our next anniversary approached, we decided to take a staycation, just an escape into each other's company without the weight of the world pressing upon us. I couldn't help but wonder what the future had in store. Would we still be dreaming of that ring next year? Would we even want it anymore? We were slowly rewriting what love and commitment meant to us, and isn't that what truly matters? I realize now that life isn't about perfect paths, it's about the journey we carve out, and I'm grateful for every bump along the road, tattooed compass and all. I still can't say for sure whether deferring the ring was the right choice, but I often see the compass as a metaphor for us, navigating together, steering clear of the shallow and unnecessary, and embracing the depth of our evolving love story. Maybe it's okay not to have all the answers right now. I trust that with Daniel by my side, every step we take will be a step worth taking, each choice reflecting who we truly are, together. I always thought family meant sticking together no matter what, but here I was, standing on the brink of not attending my sister's wedding, and it felt like a betrayal. My sister, Alyssa, had been planning her big day for over a year, and I could see how excited she was about every little detail. But as the date drew nearer, I learned the venue wasn't accessible. For someone who's been in a wheelchair since a car accident a decade ago, it was more than just a minor inconvenience, it felt like a punch to the gut. I vividly remember sitting in my living room, laptop on my lap, scrolling through pictures of the beautiful estate Alyssa had chosen with its sweeping staircases and narrow doorways. I couldn't help but wonder if she had ever envisioned a day when her older brother would be trapped outside, missing the one moment I knew she'd dreamed about since she could barely walk. I tried to shake off the knot tightening in my stomach, convincing myself I could find a way around it. Maybe I could watch the ceremony on video or have someone FaceTime me from the venue. But what kind of brother would I be if I chose to observe from a distance? That thought gnawed at me, pulling at the very fabric of my identity. I wrestled with an internal conflict, feeling a whirlwind of emotions, anger towards my sister for not ensuring the venue was accessible, guilt for even considering not going, and bitterness towards my circumstances, as if they were dragging me into a corner away from being part of the family. I finally picked up my phone, my heart racing as I dialed her number. When she answered, there was a brightness in her voice that made my heart ache. "I can't wait for you to see everything, it's going to be perfect," she exclaimed, and I could almost picture her twirling around in excitement. About that, I stumbled, my voice thick, and I felt a wave of nausea crash over me as I explained the accessibility issues. There was a loaded silence on the other end before Alyssa's tone shifted. I didn't think to check. "I'm so sorry, I thought it would work," she said, and I could tell she was genuinely upset. I didn't want her day ruined or for her to feel guilty when she shouldn't. "You should still go," I found myself insisting, my throat tight. I just don't know if I can be there and not actually be there, you know?" I hung up feeling like I just dropped an emotional bomb. The days ticked by, and the wedding loomed like a shadow over me. I could picture her in her stunning gown, surrounded by smiling friends and family, while I would be left questioning my place in it all. A week before the wedding, Alyssa called again, her voice more subdued. "Is there any way you can come? I've been looking into portable ramps and maybe we can figure this out." As sweet as her intentions were, the thought of making her scramble at the last minute felt like yet another weight on her shoulders. "You know what? I think it's okay if you and I just FaceTime," I suggested weakly, my heart breaking at disconnecting us in such a pivotal moment. "I love you, Alyssa, but I don't want to be a distraction." The day of the wedding, I dressed up and sat in front of my laptop, fighting back tears as the first chords of the wedding march filled my living room. I could almost feel the warmth of the sun streaming through the trees at the venue and hear the cheers of family members rejoicing. Alyssa looked beautiful, glowing in her gown, but as I raised my hand to wave hello, my heart felt heavier than it ever had. After the ceremony, as I watched my sister laugh and dance, a small part of me felt anger bubbling to the surface, anger at the world for shutting me out, and a bigger part, a sort of bittersweet acceptance, knowing that this was my reality. I realized that distancing myself from the family wasn't the answer, no matter how much it stung. Sure, Alyssa hadn't thought through the accessibility, but she loved me, and that love didn't hinge on the staircases I couldn't climb. As I shut my laptop after the final toast, I felt a mixture of regret and relief. I hadn't been there in person, but in some way, our bond remained intact. Months later, she and I would go to lunch, and in between bites of sweet potato fries, she slipped a note across the table, an invitation to help choose the venue for her renewal of vows in a few years. "I promise it'll be accessible, this time," she winked. And just like that, through all the twists and turns, I found a glimmer of hope that we could advance together, step by step, no matter the distance life put between us. As I sat across from her, the smell of garlic aioli mingling with the warm spring air, I realized how much I had missed moments like this, just the two of us laughing and reminiscing. The sweet potato fries felt like a bridge over the gap that had grown during our years of silence. My sister had always been the one with boundless energy, pulling me along on adventures I never asked for but ended up loving. I remembered all the times I had wheeled alongside her through bustling city streets and quiet parks, her laughter echoing in my ears while my wheelchair was simply a part of the scenery. But then came the wedding, a day that should have been filled with joy, turned into a painful reminder of our differences and the rift that widened with each turn of the planning while she embarked upon without considering my needs. It hadn't been just a physical divide, it had felt like an emotional chasm, one that I feared might never be bridged. When she slipped that note across the table, my heart did a little skip, but I also felt the weight of uncertainty. Could we truly move forward? I stared at the invitation, the elegant script of her handwriting unspooling memories of our childhood, twilight backyard adventures, late-night conversations, and the little secrets we whispered as we tucked ourselves into bed, feeling invincible. I chuckled softly at the graphics she'd sketched. In the margins, twisting shapes of flowers and stars that looked more like a childhood doodle than a wedding concept. "So where do we start?" I finally asked, my voice betraying the mix of excitement and caution churning inside me. She squeezed her brown eyes in that way she did when she was gleeful, a sign that we were on the same page again. "How about the beach? I've always wanted to say I do with the waves crashing behind me." As the conversation flowed, the ideas poured out like a refreshing tide, bringing warmth and a sense of renewal I hadn't realized I was longing for. We drew sketches on napkins, imagined colors that would drip down the canvas of our memories. The sun illuminated our laughter, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I could feel the spark of our bond rekindling. Yet, the doubt lingered in the back of my mind, a quiet reminder that we still had hurdles to overcome. Months passed as we wove through planning meetings, and as my sister pursued her dream, I cheered her on, yet my heart was a mixture of elation and lingering anxiety. How would she react when the spotlight shifted to the accessibility concerns again? Would we be able to mesh our visions, the grandeur of her dream wedding with the stark reality of my needs? I can't help but think of how the last few years had unfolded. The push and pull of our lives seemed like an intricate dance, one where we stepped in and out of sync. Then, the day finally arrived for the venue tour, and the stakes felt immeasurable. With each step closer to the location, my heart raced, anticipation wrapping around me like a comforter. This was a chance for us, not just for her, but for us as sisters. We pulled up to the beach venue, the soft sound of waves greeting us. She hopped out excitedly, taking in the scenery, and my heart tightened with a mixture of hope and dread. "What do you think?" she called back, her voice cutting through the salty breeze. I looked at the row of steps leading to the beautiful sandy stretch, and a lump formed in my throat. "It has to be accessible," I replied, my voice shaky as I formulated the words. There was a pause, then she turned back, her expression transforming from joy to concern. The realization hung between us, a flimsy thread ready to snap. "I didn't even think about that," she admitted softly. I felt a wave of frustration crash over me, but there was something in the way she looked at me, regret mixed with determination. "Let's make sure that it is," I said, grounding her back into the conversation. "What matters is that we celebrate your love, and no one should have to limit themselves based on perceived barriers." As we spent the afternoon discussing every detail from ramps to seating arrangements, I could feel that earlier tension melting away. She listened, genuinely wanting my input, and by the end of it, there was a sense of unity, a reaffirmation that we were partners in this journey. And as I wheeled down the ramp they reluctantly agreed to install, gentle sunlight spilling over us, I couldn't help but feel that we were building something reliable. A relationship that allowed for both of our anxieties and ambitions, stretching into the future like the horizon before us. We were stumbling into a new chapter, and in that moment, every step she took toward inclusivity felt as powerful as the waves crashing behind us, paving the way for us to finally come together. As we rolled away from the fluttering banners and the sound of laughter behind us, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the end of one intense chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. The sun cast a golden glow on the pavement, and every part of me ached to believe that we had finally moved past the doubts and strange tensions that had once defined our relationship. Our lunch promise, nestled between bites of sweet potato fries, felt like a pact, a blend of growth and understanding that I hadn't been sure we'd ever reach. We spent those early days after the wedding navigating each other's perspectives, developing a rhythm that suited both of us. Sarah, ever the planner, wanted to ensure that what had once felt limiting now blossomed into opportunities. I'd go through design magazines stacked on her coffee table, filling the spaces with doodles of accessible moments, visualizations of love and laughter shared across barrier-free tables. Choosing hues and fabrics that spoke to our personalities became a habit we cherished. I'd watch her eyes light up whenever she pitched new ideas, and each time my heart swelled more than the last. One evening, while we sat on her porch adorned with string lights, I shared my fears about everything that had transpired, the doubts that still occasionally crept into my knotted stomach. "What if this is just a moment?" I asked, nervousness inching into my voice. "What if we fall back into old patterns?" She laid her hand across mine, and warmth surged through me as she searched my eyes. "It's just the beginning. We're wiser now, right? We won't ignore our differences, we'll embrace them." It struck me how easily she spun my concerns into threads of commitment, weaving our different experiences into something sturdy. Months rolled on, and those gatherings became pivotal. Each event we attended, every meeting with friends, felt like practice. I learned where the gaps in conversations widened and where certain remarks stuck, and Sarah mirrored my growth with palpable enthusiasm. It was strangely exhilarating, a slow dance of vulnerability and strength. We'd share a laugh or a sidelong glance while standing in a circle of friends, our unspoken connection creating everything from an inside joke to the safety of conversation. After a year of navigating through life together, Sarah proposed we host a weekend retreat for family and friends, another venue on the horizon. This time, she meticulously scouted accessible cabins in the hills, poring over pictures and reviews. I argued that they felt too rustic, but she shrugged it off with that charm I'd come to adore. "It's about creating memories, not fitting a mold. We can have fun anywhere." As the retreat weekend approached, I felt those familiar jitters rise. What if things unraveled? What if the old resentments resurfaced? But as friends streamed into the cozy cabin and laughter overshadowed my worries, I felt the sweetness of our hard work settle around us like a hug. Sarah didn't flinch when someone knocked their drink, spilling it across the floor. She smiled, pulled me closer, and called for towels. We adapt. In those little moments, I recognized just how much we had evolved, no longer sidestepping anything difficult. We faced it head on, laughing about mishaps, sharing stories late into the night. As everyone gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories, I leaned back, soothed by the crackling flames. The weathered cabin surrounded us felt strong, just like our bond. There was something beautifully imperfect about building our new reality together, one where glances spoke volumes and where every shared experience was a step forward, however small. I could feel the roots of our relationship deepening, intertwining, much like the intertwining branches of the trees around us, and with it came a promise that neither of us would ever stop trying to understand. When Sarah caught my eye and raised her marshmallow-coated stick, I realized that this was more than a moment, it was a commitment, a radiant journey forged through respect and love. It wasn't just about getting things right, it was about creating the space to be wrong, to grow, and together, soar against any odds. I squeezed her hand, my heart whispering words of gratitude, knowing that our story was still unfolding beautifully, in ways neither of us could predict. I never thought sharing a house with 3 other people would lead to such a mess of feelings and moral questions, but here we are. I, a 30-year-old graphic designer, moved in with 2 friends and 1 boyfriend who somehow became part of this tight living situation. Let's call them Sarah, Tom, and Lucas. The dynamic worked most of the time, but when Lucas started getting comfy, I felt a shift. I'd catch him lounging on the couch, flicking through channels and eating our snacks. Sure, he was with Sarah, but it was like the boundaries began to blur between friendship and just having a roommate with coupled privileges. A week ago, Lucas asked if he could borrow my car to go to a job interview he'd been prepping for. Now, usually, I wouldn't mind, I want the guy to succeed. But I'd just spent a fortune on car repairs because my last borrower didn't think a simple flat tire needed more than a can of Fix-A-Flat. I hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of conflict bearing down on me. Look, I can give you my bike, and it's only a couple of miles to the office, I suggested, trying to be reasonable. He laughed, like I was joking, but my frustration brewed. I didn't think it was fair to risk my car after everything I'd recently put into it. I told him no. The tension in the air was thick as he mulled over my refusal. I could see him processing, disappointment washing over his face, but I held my ground. The day of the interview came, and the moment I stepped out to grab coffee, I saw him pacing in the living room, barely able to contain his anxiety. "Can I at least use the bike?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. My stomach churned. I felt guilty, knowing how badly he wanted this job, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let another person risk my livelihood for a short-term solution to a long-standing worry. "I really can't, Lucas," I replied softly, and I could see the energy in the room dim. When he called me hours later to tell me he missed the interview because he couldn't get there without my car, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief that my choice to protect my property had come without troublesome consequences, at least on my end, but guilt because I could practically hear the resignation in his voice. I spent the rest of the day questioning if I was an asshole for prioritizing my car over someone else's future. Should I have been more understanding? As I sat there in a quiet house that night, I realized that life in this house wasn't going to get any clearer, and maybe that was okay. We were all in this nebulous state of budding adulthood, trying to navigate friendships, relationships, and responsibilities. A few days later, Lucas came home and announced he found another interview opportunity, this time without the expectation of using my car. I smiled for him, but it didn't erase the bittersweet taste of how our previous encounter had shaped things. There were a million small choices that made this life complicated, and sometimes, it seemed, the hardest ones were the ones nobody saw. So, maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe I just was someone trying to protect what little I had while hoping everyone else found their way in this messy, expectedly chaotic era of life. As the days blurred into weeks, I watched Lucas navigate the hectic world of job hunting, his determination sometimes leaving me in awe. I'd casually ask him how his applications were going while simultaneously trying to not overstep my boundaries as a roommate. He often consulting his girlfriend, Jess, about the roles he was interested in, their excitement filling the apartment whenever he'd get a call for a phone interview. I couldn't blame him, either. They were young, filled with dreams, and yet, the bitterness from our previous encounter still festered in the background of my mind. I kept replaying that day, the heated exchange, the way my resolve had crumbled as I struggled to stand my ground. Was I selfish for wanting to keep my car safe from wear and tear? For wanting to create a buffer between my possessions and the unpredictable chaos of other people's lives? I found myself wrestling with a kind of guilt that felt inexplicably heavy. It wasn't until one late afternoon, after a grueling day at work engulfed in stress, that it all boiled over again. Jess came home in tears, her mascara smudged, voice cracking as she revealed Lucas hadn't gotten the job he'd pinned all his hopes on. It echoed in the hallway, and my heart sank. I could see Jess's heart shattering, and for a moment, I felt a pang of disdain towards myself. What did I even know about other people's struggles? Day after day, I had cautiously guarded my little world, but at what cost? I was a fortress, standing firm against the emotional weathering of others, and yet, here was proof that sometimes that weather could be brutal. I offered my usual platitudes, "I'm sure something else will come up, and it's not the end of the world," while inwardly questioning if I should have been more supportive. Jess, grabbing a handful of napkins and wiping her tears, looked at me like she was inching closer to needing someone to blame. That flicker in her eyes felt unmistakable, a subtle accusation hiding behind the sorrow. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs as I tried to quell the rising tide of emotions. "I know this is hard, but Lucas gave it his all," I finally said, my heart racing as I dared to speak. Jess nodded, managing a half-hearted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After she had left to meet Lucas for a pep talk, I sank into the sofa, feeling the weight of my decisions again. It hit me like a freight train. I had made my choices, but it wasn't Lucas or Jess who'd pushed me into this position. I was stuck in that gray space between self-preservation and the need to support friends. Would I always feel like this? The next couple of days were filled with the gentle reminder of life moving forward, despite my tumultuous thoughts. Lucas stayed mostly quiet after his setback, and I wondered if my reluctance to share my car had carved a distance between us that felt harsh and unyielding. Would things have been different if I'd just let him borrow it? Would he have felt less like he was trying to walk a tightrope? As I wrestled with these thoughts, I finally gathered enough courage one evening. "Hey, Lucas," I said, my voice hesitant as he sat at the dining table sifting through job listings, his brows knitted in concentration. "I've been thinking about the car. If you really need it for the next interview, you can use it." He looked up, surprise mingling with gratitude on his face. "Really? Are you sure?" I nodded, both relieved and terrified, feeling an almost physical ache in my gut. "Yeah, I trust you." After a long, pregnant pause, he smiled, a genuine light sparking in his eyes again. "Thanks. I'll be careful, I promise." And just like that, with a simple act, a layer of tension lifted from the apartment. It was as if we had both taken a step forward, not just him, but me too. We had to navigate this chaotic time together, reminding ourselves that sometimes you have to release control to create space for others. I had to let go of the guilt and the fear that I was doing everything wrong. Life, I realized, was messy and unpredictable, but maybe that's what made it worth living. Moments turned to memories, and sometimes, being a little vulnerable along the way was the best way to build the connections that mattered most. I hoped that this new chapter would see us become more than just tenants sharing a roof. Perhaps we could spark a friendship that stood stronger than the steel and rubber of any car. As Lucas prepared for the interview, I hugged the thought of growth tightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of optimism about navigating this messy era that stretched before us. A week passed, and the tension in our apartment began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Lucas was more upbeat, a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen before. He'd opened up about his experiences in getting to know the companies he was applying to, the kind of exciting roles he envisioned for himself, and I found myself rooting for him, hoping he would land something that truly excited him. There was an early morning when we found ourselves sharing coffee in our mismatched mugs, his chipped blue one, a gift from his mom, and my plain white one. We laughed about the terrible dinners we'd relied on during our school days, the microwavable mac and cheese that tasted like cardboard, and the countless times we learned that cooking was a science best left to someone else. "I seriously thought I'd never get through that phase without burning myself," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair as the sunlight streamed through our tiny kitchen window. And just like that, we were trading stories, our laughter bouncing off the walls where silence had lingered too long. It was refreshing, and I thought to myself, this is how you build friendships, brick by brick, shared moments by shared moments. Then the call came. I was in my room, trying to focus on laundry when Lucas burst through my door, an energy that surged through him so contagious I couldn't help but grin. "I got it," he exclaimed, holding his phone triumphantly aloft like a victory flag. My heart swelled as I registered the joy in his eyes. He was excited about starting this new chapter, and by extension, so was I. There was something undeniably uplifting about watching someone else chase their dreams. But as he filled the space around us with excitement, I felt an all too familiar wave of doubt wash over me. I wondered if I had done enough to support him. Should I have lent him my car despite my hesitations? What if he had shown me just a bit more appreciation? I was conflicted. Supporting your friends feels like a slippery slope sometimes, and I had been trying so hard to put myself first. Later that evening, I sat alone on our balcony, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars against the velvet night sky. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the open door while the hum of laughter faintly echoed from inside. Lucas was celebrating with our other roommate, Maria, who had baked a cake for the occasion, chocolate, of course, his favorite. As I listened to their joyous banter, I felt a pang of loneliness creep in. The moment felt profound, a celebration of dreams met with the bittersweet taste of my own insecurities. "I'm here, you know," I murmured to the night, unsure of who I was addressing. Would saying it out loud somehow reaffirm my worth, reclaim my decision? But another part of me echoed the doubts. Would I always prioritize my needs over his? Maybe there was a balance to be found, a compromise that allowed both of us to thrive without sacrificing our own boundaries. That night, after the cake was devoured and the laughter subsided, I finally gathered the courage to open up during one of our late-night talks. "Hey, Lucas," I started carefully, "I'm really proud of you for nailing that interview. But can I be honest?" He leaned in, curious. "I still wonder about that day. I know I seemed like a jerk for not letting you use my car, and I just want you to know. It was hard for me to say no." I watched as his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "I get it. It was a tough situation for both of us. You were looking out for yourself, and that's okay. We've all got our own battles, right?" That simple statement illuminated something vital. Self-advocacy was not only allowed but also necessary in a world where everyone tried to balance their dreams against the pressures life handed them. I smiled, a warm surge of relief washing over me. My heart felt lighter, and in that moment, the notion of friendship began to reshape. From roommates to allies, navigating an uncertain world together felt less daunting now. Maybe this chapter would take time to unfold completely, and maybe the past would echo, but beneath it all, we were learning. Not just about each other but about ourselves, about accountability, support, and the nuances of trust. It was an ongoing journey, and while I couldn't predict where it would lead us, this felt like the beginning of something beautiful. So, I took a breath, let the hope settle in, and thought maybe, just maybe, we all could find our way, one step at a time. I never thought I'd be the one to put my foot down in our friend group, but here I am, standing on a precipice of sorts, caught between loyalty and discomfort. I'm Sarah, and I've been friends with Mike, Jess, and Clara for over a decade, since our awkward high school days. We've shared everything from triumphs to heartbreaks, always finding solace in each other's company, until house rules turned the company into a battlefield. It all started when we began hanging out at Mike's place more frequently. At first, it felt like an extension of our usual get-togethers, filled with laughter and shared snacks. But then, as the weeks turned to months, I started noticing little things: the strict silence during movie nights unless you had a comment worthy of praise, the way he would glance at his watch if someone went over their allowed time in the bathroom, and the unsolicited critique of how my coffee preference was too frivolous for an adult. It bugged me more than I wanted to admit, but I convinced myself it was just his quirk, something we could laugh about later. However, as the restrictions mounted, no arguing over board games, no using your phone unless it was for him, I began to see the cracks in our camaraderie. Jess and Clara were as uncomfortable as I was. I remember one night, sitting on the sagging couch, the air thick with tension as Mike launched into another diatribe about etiquette, and I felt my heart racing. After a particularly stifling evening, I brought it up to the group. "Do you think we should say something?" I asked, my voice carrying a hint of hesitance. Clara chewed her lip, glancing at Jess, who nodded slowly. We weren't mad at Mike for being himself, we just didn't want to live under a magnifying glass that forced us to tiptoe through every gathering. That's when I suggested we take a break from his house, for our own sanity, really. It's not about excluding him, it's about preserving what we've built together, I argued. They agreed, albeit hesitantly, and we decided to meet at Jess's place instead. The first time we did it, there was a relief that washed over us like an unexpected breeze. We chatted freely, erupted in laughter without checking the clock, and the pulse of our friendship returned. But, of course, Mike found out. I still remember the way his face twisted when he confronted me, hurt spilling out of his eyes like an open wound. "So, you don't want to hang out at my place anymore?" he asked incredulously, and I felt the guilt creep in. "It's not that, it's just..." I stumbled, realizing how fragile friendships can be. Our conversations became a series of circular debates after that, like two opposing trains on the same track. I didn't want to hurt him but felt compelled to stand my ground. Over the weeks that followed, the group dynamic shifted. While Jess and Clara enjoyed the newfound freedom, I found myself stuck in a loop of guilt and worry. What if we ended up pushing him away entirely? That thought haunted me, casting a shadow over our fun times. We tried inviting him to join us, but he'd show up with an attitude. It was just off. Little jabs, remarks about our advanced carefree spirit, and things that made it clear he was petulant over our decision. I wanted to talk him into understanding that it wasn't about him, it was about the environment. Yet, every time I opened my mouth, words felt inadequate. The tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Some nights, lying in bed, I thought about how friendships evolve. I wondered if I had crossed a line, whether I truly was the asshole. In my heart, I wanted to say no. I believed compromise is part of any relationship, but I never had the guts to confront Mike again, fearing it would unravel the fragile thread holding us together. Looking back now, I realize it took months of distance for us to finally communicate properly. We met up again for coffee, at a neutral spot because the house rule debates just got way too heavy, but this time, the walls were down. We could finally talk about how our friendship had changed without the pressure of the rigid rules. There was still hurt, okay, a lot of hurt, but also a willingness to listen. We discussed boundaries, about what felt comfortable, and, strangely enough, Mike confessed how much he feared being left out. Somehow, through all the misunderstandings, we found common ground. It's a messy process, friendships, but I think we're on the way back to being whole again, or at least learning how to navigate this new chapter together. One thing's for sure, though, I'd never advocate for ghosting a friend over house rules again. As I sit here reflecting on all that's happened, the weight of that weekend is still with me, heavy yet oddly uplifting. I thought letting go of the rigid house rules would lead us to a happier place, but seeing how it unraveled initially had me questioning my instincts. The truth is, Mike's home had always been our sanctuary, a gathering spot where laughter echoed late into the night. But it was also a space where unspoken tension lingered, hovering above us like a dark cloud just waiting to rain. When I encouraged the group to rethink our visits, stating that the rules about food and drinks, even how we talked around certain topics, were stifling, I felt more like a provocateur than a friend trying to protect our dynamic. When we finally confronted Mike together, it felt like peeling back layers we'd been adding to ourselves over the years. Words flowed as we sat in the living room, the familiar walls lined with photos of memories that now felt tainted by our recent rifts. I watched as Mike's face shifted from hurt to confusion and then slowly to realization. I could see that we weren't just addressing rules, we were unpacking insecurities and meticulously wrapping each other in empathy. The feeling of isolation I'd sensed in him, an atmosphere thick enough to choke on, dissolved into light when he shared that he feared being left out, that he'd built those rules as a safeguard but had instead trapped himself in us. When we spoke about boundaries, I felt a sense of catharsis. It was remarkably humbling to see Mike's vulnerability wash over him like a tide, and I reflected on how often I'd felt the same dread of being uninvited or merely ignored. There was a rawness to those conversations that left us breathless, yet relieved in an odd way, like a storm finally clearing. One by one, we shared our own burdens, the little things that built up over time, creating resentment. A sense of understanding formed between us, like an invisible bond tightening with each confession. By the end of our heart-to-heart, we dismantled the fear-based structure of our friendship to make room for something more authentic. Though there was still a long way to go, hurts can be stubborn like weeds in a garden, we promised to work through them together, to navigate this way forward like a group of explorers hunting for new paths in familiar woods. I might not have all the answers, but one thing became abundantly clear: I didn't want to lose our connection over something so fundamental as house rules, which, when you peel back the layers, stemmed from fears both spoken and unspoken. As I look back now, I feel relieved that we could transform dysfunction into an opportunity for deeper bonds. It reminded me that friendships are messy, yes, but they're ours to cultivate. I learned that conversation is the best fertilizer we could provide, nurturing dialogue until we were finally comfortable sitting together in silence again, knowing we'd chosen each other, rules or no rules. Life has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Beyond the surface issues, we unearth deeper truths about ourselves and one another that I think will keep us anchored through whatever storms lie ahead. As I look back now, I feel relieved that we could transform dysfunction into an opportunity for deeper bonds. It reminded me that friendships are messy, Yes, but they're ours to cultivate. I learned that conversation is the best fertilizer we could provide, nurturing dialogue until we were finally comfortable sitting together in silence again, knowing we'd chosen each other, rules or no rules. Life has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it. Beyond the surface issues, we unearth deeper truths about ourselves and one another that I think will keep us anchored through whatever storms lie ahead. One evening, as we gathered at the park, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting golden rays over our small assembly of blankets and snacks, I could hear their laughter, a sound that had felt distant for so long. There was a lightness in the air, a tangible ease, and for a moment, I let myself be fully present, breathing it all in. As we passed around a shared bowl of popcorn, Mike looked around and broke the comfortable silence. "You know," he said, tossing a kernel into his mouth, "I had this idea that all of you were ganging up on me when you started coming over less often. I thought I was the nuisance." His laughter was half-hearted, but it kicked off a cascading effect, each of us nodding along as we revealed our own misunderstandings, our own doubts that had turned into insecurities. It turned into a revelation, a realization that we were all human, each guarding things that shouldn't be bottled up. I remember feeling a swell of gratitude wash over me, realizing that this group could survive the rough patches, that we could be honest without fear of judgment. It felt oddly cathartic, acknowledging those feelings rather than letting them fester. Then Christine, who had been mostly quiet, chimed in with a shaky but determined voice, "We've all felt anxious about something, haven't we? Whether it's about being too clingy, or feeling like we don't belong." The honesty hung in the air, a unifying thread that wove us closer. I saw lighter sparks in their eyes, each of us willing to step outside our comfort zones for the sake of our friendship. I felt lighter too. Maybe this was how growth looked, sometimes jagged, sometimes beautiful. The next week, we organized a board game night, a perfect excuse to hang out without the shadows of rules hanging overhead. We laughed, we argued over game pieces, and at one point, Mike playfully accused me of cheating, but instead of letting it spiral into an argument, I laughed it off. "Okay, guilty as charged." Then we both burst into laughter, and it felt like every uncomfortable moment from the previous weeks had burned away, just smoke dissipating into the night sky. I packed my things to leave that evening, and as we said our goodbyes, I felt a genuine warmth. We shared a group hug, an unspoken agreement that we'd keep fighting for this thing we had, however imperfect. I hoped we'd learn to communicate enough that no one felt left out or diminished again. As I walked back home, under a blanket of stars, I smiled at the thought of what we'd built, a bridge over a tumultuous river instead of letting it swallow us whole. Life might throw more storms our way, but now at least, we had boats together. I resolved to never forget that conversation is magic, and in a world where people often ghost each other over differences, we chose connection instead. As I settled into bed that night, I felt something bittersweet creeping in, an acknowledgement that while we had made progress, we were still a work in progress ourselves. But maybe that was okay, too. We'd navigate this new chapter together, collected not as perfect friends but as imperfect allies in this life, and I was more grateful than ever to be on this journey with them. I never imagined my life would turn into a reality show, and yet here I am, sitting on my porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, replaying the whole mess in my head. You see, I share custody of my two kids, Clara and Jake, with their mother, Sophie. We navigated the stormy seas of divorce with a semblance of civility, or at least I thought we did. But when she informed me she was being deployed for 6 months, my heart dropped. Not because she was going away, this was her career after all, but because of what it meant for our kids. Sophie married Matt, a guy I've never really clicked with. He's a nice enough guy, sure, but there's something about him that makes me uneasy, especially when it comes to my kids. As deployment day approached, it became clearer that Matt would be the primary caretaker. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, especially after hearing some stories from friends about step-parents not being all they're cracked up to be. I had a chat with Sophie before the big day and the topic came up. She was oblivious to the little voice in my head telling me, "What if he's not a safe choice for your kids?" I mentioned my reservations, trying to tread lightly, but the look on her face made me feel like I had toppled a stack of fragile glassware. The conversation quickly turned into a heated debate. "He's their stepfather, he loves them just as much as you do," she had said, her voice rising. I tried to explain my perspective, but it felt like I was shouting into a whirlpool. When Sophie left for deployment, my anxiety only swelled. I finally had a heart-to-heart with myself and decided to reach out to her via text. "I can't let the kids stay with Matt while you're gone," I typed out, heart racing. I knew it was a bold statement, but I felt it was necessary. But the moment I hit send, I felt that familiar pit of doubt unearth itself. Did I cross a line? A few minutes later, my phone chimed, and her response was swift and vehement. You can't just decide that without discussing it. He is their stepfather. I wanted to explain how uneasy I felt, but instead, I simply felt a wave of guilt wash over me. After what felt like an eternity of back and forth texts, I told her flat out that this wasn't about her, or even Matt, but my kids' safety and well-being. The silence that followed was deafening and uncomfortable. I hung up feeling like I had ignited a harsh storm. I thought about Clara and Jake. I could picture them standing there with us as Sophie packed her bags, tears pooling in their innocent eyes. I wanted to protect them, but was I truly the asshole for trying to create a better environment for their safety? We eventually settled on a temporary solution, where the kids would stay with my parents while Sophie was away. But the tension between Sophie and me took longer to ease. I still think about that day and wonder if I made the right call. Maybe I'm overprotective, or maybe deep down I just didn't trust Matt. Regardless, I'm still waiting for things to settle. It's hard to navigate the choppy waters of co-parenting when all anyone wants is peace. I guess I'll figure it out as we go along, one day at a time, hoping to find some clarity amidst the chaos. The weeks that followed were like a slow drip of rain, each day heavy with uncertainty. I kept rationalizing my decision, telling myself I was only acting in my children's best interest, but it felt different when I was alone with my thoughts at night. My parents had welcomed the kids with open arms, their house filled with laughter and the occasional squabble over toys, but every time I left them there, a knot would tighten in my stomach. I had spent years feeling like the steady, guiding hand, and handing that responsibility over, even temporarily, was daunting. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one Thursday evening, pulling me from my reverie. It was a message from Sophie. My heart skipped. It had been a few days since we last spoke, and I didn't know what to expect. It read, "Can we talk?" That single sentence felt like a prelude to a storm. I knew it would lead to either a breakthrough or another wave of conflict. I hesitated for a moment, the screen lighting up my anxious face as I typed, "Sure, when?" After a few agonizing minutes, she replied, "I'm free after the kids' bedtime," which was just a few hours away. I spent those hours pacing my living room, running through countless scenarios in my head, silently rehearsing my lines, clutching at the fragile threads of our co-parenting arrangement. When the clock finally struck 8, I sat with my hands tightly wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, my heart thudding. The kids were happily lost in a story with my parents, and for the first time in weeks, the quiet felt like both a blessing and a curse. Sophie arrived just as the moon peeked through the clouds, casting an ethereal glow across the room. I motioned for her to sit, and there was an almost palpable tension in the air, thick enough that I could almost taste my apprehension. "Can we put everything on the table?" she started, her voice steady but laced with a subtle edge of frustration. I nodded, steeling myself for what was sure to be a tricky conversation. She spoke about her deployment, the fears and uncertainties she faced, not just with her job but the lingering anxiety about who was taking care of her kids while she was away. Matt, her husband, had been asking about when he could see them, and I could see how torn she was. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe he could take care of the kids as well as she could, but I could hear the unspoken doubts in her words. "I just don't think he's ready," I said finally, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. "He's only been part of their lives for a little while, and they're still adjusting. I can't just let them go without knowing they're safe." "That's what it comes down to, isn't it?" she replied, her voice rising slightly. "You don't trust him. You don't trust me." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and biting. I opened my mouth to respond but then closed it again, realizing that the truth was more complicated than that. It wasn't just distrust, it was coming from a place of love. My love for our kids made my instincts flare up like a wildfire. "I want what's best for them, Sophie," I finally said, words mostly clipped, the emotion backing them sending tremors through my chest. "But I've seen what can happen when things go wrong. What if he loses control? What if they don't feel safe? I just wanted to protect them." Her expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I get it. I really do. But they need their dad, too, and I need space to know they're okay when I'm gone. Can't we find a way?" Suddenly, the walls of our conflict felt like they were shifting, and I found myself considering her plea through the lens of a mother's fear. Perhaps my stance was too rigid, too rooted in my own fears. "I'm willing to give him a chance, but we both need to establish boundaries and rules," I proposed, an inkling of compromise blossoming amidst the tension. As we talked, laying everything on the table, I started to envision a plan, one that we could both agree upon. It felt good to share the weight, and that heaviness lightened just a little. By the time we parted ways that night, I felt a cautious optimism. I still had my reservations about Matt, and perhaps that wasn't going to change overnight. But we had taken a step forward, and I clung to that. As I tucked myself into bed later, the moonlight lining my room with a silver glow, I felt a little more centered. I didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but I hoped that we could navigate it together. I fell asleep that night dreaming of balance, of co-parenting that resembled a dance, one careful step at a time, learning to trust the rhythm while keeping the safety of our children in mind. Days turned into weeks, and as Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. As Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. In those early weeks, I grappled with sleepless nights, rolling over to see the empty half of my bed, again. My thoughts circled like vultures, always settling back to Matt. I'd heard rumors about his past, how he wasn't just another face in the crowd, but a man who had stumbled through some shady days before cleaning up his act. I wanted to trust Sophie's judgment, but that nagging voice in the back of my mind made it difficult to unwind. One afternoon over coffee at our usual cafe, I shared my concerns with Sophie. She sat across from me, brow furrowed, and I could tell my worries were weighing on her heart. "You know, it's not easy for me either," she sighed, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. "I chose to be with Matt because I saw the good in him. I feel torn, really. But I'm the one in the middle." Her honesty, raw and tangible, made that barrier between us feel thinner for a moment. I wanted to assure her that I had her and the kids' best interests at heart, but the whole situation felt so convoluted. After a couple of weeks, the shifts began to show. The kids returned from Grandma's house animated, joy bubbling in their voices as they recapped the fishing trips with Grandpa and the story times that stretched late into the night. Even the way they lit up at the mention of their mom made me smile, at least they were secure in that love. But there was a shadow on the periphery when they mentioned how Matt had taken them hiking. I could feel my heart rate quicken. What had that outing entailed? One evening, I mustered up the courage to call him directly. Sophie had given me his number when I expressed my need for clarity. I wanted to get a sense of his intentions before the kids spent another weekend with him. As the phone rang, I felt a mix of anxiety and unexpected responsibility surge through my veins. "Hey, it's Jake," I said when he picked up. "Hey, man. What's up?" There was a casual ease in his voice that made me want to drown it out with 1,000 questions. Instead, I chose one. "I just wanted to check in about the kids." "Yeah, they're great. We had a blast hiking the other day. They've got energy for days." I could picture him, the smile stretched across his face, but I needed more than just enthusiasm. His joy felt almost superficial. "Look, can we be real here?" I went on, taking a leap. "I'm just trying to understand the boundaries here. Their safety is my priority, you know?" A silence hung between us, thickening the air like humidity before a storm. "Totally get it, man," he replied finally, his tone shifting slightly. "You don't have to worry. I care about your kids." With that, I felt a twinge of something, a glimmer of hope, maybe? Or was it just a trapdoor opening into more anxiety? Either way, I didn't want to dismiss that hint of sincerity. As the days rolled on, I took this budding relationship with Matt as an opportunity to breathe. I started to see him more as a partner in this shared responsibility rather than just a potential threat. That shift didn't come easy. There were still moments when I felt the urge to shield my kids, to declare my territory. But then I'd witness them during their visits, their giggles echoing, loud and free, And it reminded me that every step forward was a blessing. The real test came one Saturday evening. Sophie called, her voice laced with urgency. Jake, Matt and we had a fight. He said some things, and it got heated. Can you take the kids for a few days? Hearing her raw vulnerability made my heart race, but I immediately tailored my response to how I'd want to react, calm, collected. Of course, I can. Just focus on you and keeping everything together. As I squeezed my kids close for a sleepover in the living room that night, each of them curled into a little ball of comfort on the couch while they drifted to sleep. And there, in that warm cocoon of blankets and pillows, I felt that flicker of hope again. This new family we were building might just be fragile, but it was rich with potential, woven together with care. In a way, we were rewriting the narrative that life had drafted for us. Maybe, just maybe, we would find peace in this chaotic co-parenting journey, moment by tender moment. Reflecting on it now, I'm still trying to figure things out, but I believe we're finding our way. I know it won't be perfect, progress rarely is, but those smiles on the kids' faces remind me that even within uncertainty, there's a promise of warmth. And for now, I'll keep nurturing that promise, wherever it may lead us.